Thank you.
We're off to a super start. So, what are we going to be talking about today? Let's go over the overview. We're going to talk a little bit about bias and how we overcome it. And when we're looking at bias, we're not just looking at our own biases, but also the biases that come up when we are interviewing individuals. What are the blind spots that everyone has? What are some of the common things that show up that make it difficult as an investigator to know what is actually factual and what is someone's perception of what is factual. So that will be what we'll talk about there. We'll talk generally about the investigation process, including some challenging situations, and then we will be focusing on interviewing and our interview skills. Now, many or most of you will have done some interviewing already, including in a police context. And some of the things will be very similar, and others may be a little bit different than what you're accustomed to. So we will walk through those pieces as well. So we're going to start with a little visualization exercise. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or at least look down so you're not looking at the rest of the room. And what I'm going to do is walk you through a little visualization. I'm going to tell a story, and I want you to visualize that story in your mind. So, what is coming up as we're doing it? So, I'm going to start. So, either close your eyes or just look down so you're not distracted by other things. So, you've been unwell. Whoops, I need to admit somebody. 1 second. Brenda's coming in. We'll just give Brenda a moment. Good morning, Brenda. We are just looking down at the moment, and I'm doing a little visualization exercise. So it's just to be in our own space for a moment. So you've been unwell for the last few days and decide to go to a walk-in clinic. This being Canada, you don't have access to a family doctor, so you have to go to the walk-in clinic. When you enter the clinic, you check in at the desk and start looking for somewhere to sit. You scan the room and you notice an elderly couple sitting there. They're not doing anything obvious like holding hands, but they're sitting next to each other, so it's clear they're a couple. Now picture them. What do they look like? In your mind, you've pictured an elderly couple. Now, one of those two in the couple is coughing, and you're worried that might be contagious. So you decide, well, I'm not going to sit near them. And you look elsewhere for a seat. You then see a parent trying to soothe a child who is crying. So it's a young child who's crying. Picture the parent and picture the child. So you don't want to sit near a crying child either. So you continue to scan the room and you come across a well-dressed young professional, probably late 20s, early 30s. Again, picture that person. You decide to sit there. A few minutes later, the nurse comes to get you and takes you into that little waiting room where you're just waiting again in the exam room. And then the doctor comes in and you share your symptoms and the doctor writes a prescription. So visualize the nurse coming to get you and then the doctor writing the prescription. Okay, so this is an opportunity now for us to share. And our session today will go so much better if we each participate. I know sometimes first thing in the morning, it's like, I don't want to talk, but I really need to hear from you. So let me know, first of all, when you pictured an elderly couple, what did they look like? Anyone want to share that? Just go ahead and share because
My
I won't be able to see
parents.
it.
I pictured my parents.
You pictured your
There's,
parents. Interesting.
yeah.
That's a good one. What else did you picture? Okay, so I'm going to ask you questions that you don't need to answer. Just answer them in your mind. So the elderly couple, what race were they? Were they white? Were they individuals of color? Were they individuals that were representative of your ethnic background? What did you picture in your mind's eye? Did you see a mixed race couple? Did you see a same-sex couple? Or did you see a man and a woman? Now think about the parent with the child. Did you see a father? Now, we did this one time and someone said, I knew it was a father because if the mother was there, the kid wouldn't be crying, which I don't think is necessarily fair. But what did you picture? Did you picture a mother and a child, or did you picture a father and a child? The next part of the visualization was to picture the well-dressed professional. What did they look like? What racial background were they? Did you see a woman or transgender individual? Did you picture someone wearing a headscarf or even a turban? And the nurse, same exercise. What was their background? What was their gender? And also the doctor. So this exercise was based on one done as a visualization in a subway, and it was done by Rania El Mugamar, and we've adopted that from the original version. So anyone have ideas on why we would have done an exercise like this one? Because it's not to make you feel bad, but there's a reason why we would have done an exercise like this. Thoughts?
To identify unconscious bias.
Absolutely. And did it uncover unconscious bias for you? Did you were you surprised when thinking about it? Oh, I only saw this.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Even though just admitting someone, even though I've done this many times, even as I'm saying it out loud, I picture people that are of the same racial background as me. And I think really the key to it is that we are all biased. These things are ingrained in us, they are taught to us. It's about our media influences, our social media influences, what we see in movies. And so we have ideas of what something or someone should look like. And it doesn't make us bad people, it makes us human beings. But it is the stuff that will affect us when we do our investigation work. And biases are interesting because I've heard them described like an elastic band. When we are conscious of them, when we think about them, we're stretching our consciousness and our understanding. But when we stop thinking about them, the elastic band snaps back and we end up back in our habits of being biased. And so we want to make sure that we don't do that. Um, Here, I'm just going to change this for a second. So the elastic band thing is important for us all to remember. And it's also important for us all to remember that we are each biased. Um, One of the things that's out there is the implicit bias test. And I've done this test myself. And there's a bunch of different biases you can check for in yourself, like gender bias, racial bias. You can go in. I think it's Harvard that does it, and it's free. It's the implicit bias test. So I thought I would get a gold star. I do this work all the time and that I would do well. And it turns out I have a gender bias. I'm a bit sexist. And the test that I did was to try and match up gendered names with subjects in school, like math, science, humanities. And you have these little connectors with your mouse. And if it takes you a while to connect, say, a female gendered name with math or science, it suggests you've got a bias against the ability of women and girls to succeed in those areas in school. And so that was a bit of an eye opener for me. I mean, I knew I would have some bias, but I thought for sure on that one, I would not have a bias because consciously and rationally, I do not hold that bias. But it's that subconscious piece, which is why we call it unconscious bias, that makes it tricky. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, when we talk about bias, I'm thinking about two things: our biases as investigators and the biases that we see in individuals that we are interviewing. So, what types of biases impact investigations? And I'm going to give you a chance to fill me in on that as well. I'm just trying to see, just give me one moment because I'm going to see if I can see your video. All right, I'm still not seeing it easily. Okay, so what I will need you to do, as I mentioned already, is just kind of go off mute and tell me. But what types of biases do you think impact investigations? You would have probably learned some of them already in the work that you're doing in policing, but what comes up for you? You can also put it in the chat if you're more comfortable doing it that way. Can you identify any biases that might affect investigations?
Women police officers being treated differently than men, I would say, is my bias.
Yes, absolutely. That one comes up. What other biases do we see?
The stereotypical old white leader. chief, deputy chief, senior officer.
Yep, that's another one. What else? Are there any biases that you've been taught to avoid when you're doing investigations in policing? What are some of the hazards that might come up that can create blind spots? All right. Well, I'll give you some hints and then maybe you'll think of some others. So one of the first ones.
How do you
I have
decide who
another
makes
video.
the team?
Sorry, forgot I was doing this video. It started to play. Were you able to hear the sound as it started to play? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
How do you decide who makes the team? Who gets an opportunity and who gets cut? We want to believe that we think rationally and objectively, that all of our motivations are pure and free from biases, but we know that's not always the case because of our potential blind spots. Blind spots, or unconscious biases, are mental shortcuts that help us make sense of the millions of pieces of data we take in each day. They can potentially influence our decisions. Not all biases are bad. It's normal to have a favorite sports team or food or prefer being around your own family. Having a bias doesn't always mean you're against something. In fact, the halo effect means exactly the opposite. It's when you favor a person based on a positive first impression. In your mind, they can do no wrong, even when they prove otherwise. And assuming someone will be great at absolutely everything can actually end up setting them up for failure. The Horns effect happens when someone is defined by a negative first impression. No matter what they do, they can't shake it. Halo and horns often carry over into other areas and color all the ways we see and experience someone. The halo and horns effects can also be reinforced by confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when we look for evidence that supports our beliefs and ignore evidence that contradicts them. Let's take a little test. What rule defines this number sequence? Now that you've got your rule in mind, can you come up with a series of numbers that also fit that rule? What about these? Which sequences fit? If you said 20, 22, 24, you'd be wrong. Actually, all of them fit. The simple rule was that the numbers got bigger. It's likely that your unconscious mind quickly saw a pattern of even numbers that go up by 2, and that narrowed your thinking. This shows that confirmation bias can rob us of other possible solutions. Numerous studies have shown that people are more likely to seek out information that confirms a belief and disregard information that doesn't. One study found that people spent over 36% more time reading articles that confirm their beliefs. In the business world, this habit could end up squashing innovation before it starts. So what can we do when we're wired to hang on to halo, horns, and pay more attention to things that confirm our beliefs? How can we counteract our unconscious bias? The first step is to be open. Try not to let one shining moment or one speed bump sway your opinion forever. Make sure you look at all the evidence objectively. Play your own devil's advocate and seek out contradictory views. And slow down your thinking. Ask questions and bring in other perspectives to expand your point of view. When we recognize our blind spots, that's when we can get beyond halo and horns. That's when we can overcome confirmation bias. And that's when we can see people for who they are and who they can become. How do you
Okay, so let's talk about some of those biases that that showed up in the video and some of the other ones we've identified. So how can gender and racial biases crop up in our investigations? Again, thinking both in terms of what we are investigating as well as what we might fall prey to as investigators. So I invite you to put that into the chat. Give me some thought as to how you think that can manifest, or just go off mute and share your thoughts. But I'd really love to hear from you.
I'd like to think that I call it the good guy syndrome in policing, right? And more so, I'm not experiencing this investigative aspect of workplace investigations, but having the familiarity bias. So he's a good guy, so we don't look at his competence or his ability to do the job, but just because he's, won't cause any problems, looks like I do, same thought patterns. I feel like that's a huge bias in policing, and I would suspect that that might play in investigations as well. If you can relate and have that familiarity bias with the individual that you're investigating or interviewing, then that might skew your ability to be open and transparent or fair.
That's very important, Tammy. And I think that is especially true when you are interviewing people you already know, because that can happen. But there's a couple of biases that you've identified. One is the halo effect, which is they're a good guy, they wouldn't do this. And I've had that expressed to me many times in investigations. I know that person, they would never do that. And I often think of a friend of mine that I went to high school with, and she had a good friend all through college, and she really liked him. And then he was charged and convicted of child pornography. I was like, I had no idea. I never knew that. But we tend to see this halo around people where they're a good person. I would never expect that of them. And when I get called in to do investigations, every now and then someone will say to me, oh, I know them. There's no way that this happened. So we have to be conscious that we are not just giving this overarching benefit of the doubt to someone because we know them. And then the other one Tammy raised is this idea of biases towards people that are similar to us. I've heard it called the like me bias, like they're like me, or similar to me bias. But it's a bias that we have where if we connect with somebody, if we click with them, we are going to tend as investigators to believe them more. So we have to be very alert to these things happening. In terms of the halo effect one, there was one I was doing in policing a few years ago, and it was an inspector, and everyone liked him except the complainant. Maybe one or two witnesses had some comments about him. Very likable person, personable, and seemed to have good answers for everything. And I was struggling to make my finding. And I chatted with Natasha about it because I was like, I can't seem to get over this hurdle, this reconciliation of two people. And she said, maybe he's just that guy that is really charming on the surface, but when you dig a little bit deeper, there's another side to things. And so that was kind of the kick I needed. And I went back and looked in more detail at some of the text messages and emails that were exchanged and reevaluated how I was reviewing them, and I think became more objective. And in the end, I was able to get over that hurdle that I think was happening to me of that halo effect. In terms of gender and racial bias, there's often this, how dare you or how dare they confront this, or they are angry or shrill, that we interpret people's behavior in ways that are racially biased and gendered. And so we have to be very conscious of that. Gender bias often comes up in terms of people acting outside of what we expect a stereotypical gendered norm to be. And so it's really thinking through that, through those lenses. Okay, so another one that came up was confirmation bias. So what is your understanding? There's a little bit of a snippet in the video, but what is your understanding of what confirmation bias means in the context of an investigation? So the video talked about it more generally, but how is that impactful or risky in an investigation? So go ahead and give me your thoughts.
For me, I think it would be almost like tunnel vision, right? It really narrows the scope of your investigation and doesn't let you look at any other parts of everything.
Absolutely. And so do you have any strategies for how you overcome that confirmation bias?
I talk to colleagues a lot, and my own research, just understanding. My big thing is understanding things, which helps me move in the right track.
Yes, that's a great strategy. And it's why we do peer reviews here. I think most investigation firms have a process of peer reviews so that it helps with some of those blind spots. There is that expression, I'll believe it when I see it, but it's actually we'll see it when we believe it. Once we have a belief, we look for those things that assemble to support that belief, and that could be problematic. Any other thoughts on what you have done to address confirmation bias in your investigation work? Oh, we're getting Brenda twice. Brenda, were you about to? So it sounds like somebody from the Ottawa group was about to say something and then we lost you. I don't know if you were just trying to have a conversation in your end and then muted it, or what happened there. Okay, I guess not. One of the other things that happens with confirmation bias is that when we're looking for harassment, as you would have learned yesterday, we're looking for a pattern of conduct sometimes. But when we look at each allegation, we have to look at each allegation discreetly. So is there enough to support that? Not, here's 10 things that happened. The first two I've substantiated, and therefore, yeah, all of the rest of them happened as well. You're going to need to be able to defend each individual finding of fact, each finding on discrete allegations. And maybe they are all examples of a pattern of yelling at somebody. And these are all different occasions when it happened, but you have to be careful not to say, I've got witnesses for the first two times, and therefore I'm just saying it happened every time. You really have to avoid that thinking, because it can trip you up as an investigator. But I also think that when it comes to investigating other people's perspectives, so this is now not your confirmation bias, but the confirmation bias of the parties you are investigating, that is something to look for as well. So often, very often, we will have a group of people who will say, this person is a problem. This staff sergeant is an issue, and everybody will say kind of the same things. Is that because that's their genuine belief? Or has confirmation bias crept in? Somebody says that staff sergeant's a problem, she does X, Y, and Z, and then everybody's looking for evidence that supports that. And when you look for evidence of things, you can often find it. So we have to be mindful that things aren't always as they are presented to us. That yes, everybody can believe something and they can genuinely believe it and they can be credible in that belief, but it's not an objective belief because it's been tainted by individuals talking to each other and creating this narrative that then becomes self-reinforcing because they're looking and looking and looking for evidence of that. Have any of you experienced that in your investigations where you've seen someone or seen a situation where you struggled to know whether it was exactly as presented or a bunch of people working themselves into a bit of a state over something? Any thoughts on that? Have you experienced that one?
I have, in the sense that I worked in our drug unit for about 10 years, and then, you kind of hear about from people about constables that were working patrol. You hear about their habits, and I'll give an example where there was one constable in particular that you hear from a few people, they're lazy or they're incompetent or whatever, and then, well, again, look back to the road, and that wasn't the case at all. They were very competent. They weren't lazy at all. It was just one person's perspective. But then you start hearing that, kind of that mob mentality where everybody's kind of jumping on board and portraying them to be something that they're not.
Absolutely. So then as an investigator, so if you're investigating that kind of a narrative, any thoughts on how you would unpack that so that you're identifying, is it just one person that's, spinning a story for everybody else, or is it actually true? Any thoughts on how you would tackle that when investigating it?
I think maybe you'd have to ask questions like, can you source that information, or where did that information come from, or what forms that belief, and try to, oh, I heard from Susie. And if everybody says they heard from Susie, we sort of now know,
Yes, I actually did an investigation in policing once where I had to draw like a timeline because it all came back to one person. And so that one was it was a mobbing investigation. A lot of it was around gossip, but I think that's a great technique. Like, what's your source for that information? Is it your own observation, or is it something that you've heard and then you've looked for that observation? But you can't just take it at face value. Any other strategies for addressing kind of that, mob mentality, if you will, or the confirmation bias that other people have? To me, it's even just being alert to the fact that that can happen. So we just always have to be listening and thinking, listening and thinking. So is this exactly as being presented, or is there more here? And so much of this we've already talked about is unconscious. So people may genuinely believe these things, but they are in this trap. And the other one that I see all the time in workplace investigations is attribution error. So attribution error is basically attributing something hostile to someone else's motives, or attributing poor character. So she just got cut off by another driver. What is she thinking? Good chance she's not thinking, oh, they must be in a hurry, that poor person. They are more likely to be thinking, you're a jerk, you're an idiot. But if we cut somebody off, we may not even notice that we've cut them off, or we might think, oh, well, I was in the hurry, or I didn't see them. And so we're far more forgiving of our own motives than we are of others. And these two things sit together, confirmation bias and attribution error, because once we decide that somebody thinks they're better than everybody else, they are lazy, all those things, then we start to look for evidence of that. And it's a pretty tricky situation. So there is this expression that's Hanlon's razor, which is never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by neglect. And I saw this little meme once online, but some possible explanations for someone's behavior. On the right-hand side, they don't like you. They think they're better than you. They're a jerk. The other possible explanation is they misunderstood. They're tired, hungry, stressed, or distracted. Hanlon's razor is that middle point there, which says, think of the more benign explanation. Most of the time, people aren't thinking of somebody else. It's usually benign neglect or busyness, all the things that are on the left-hand side. And so when we are doing an investigation, we need to stress test those assumptions. So if someone says they are, or they think they're better than people, or they're just doing this because, we have to test that belief. Why do you think that? Is there another possible explanation? Is it possible that they didn't hear you? Is it possible that they're going through something in their life right now, and saying hi to everybody and being social is beyond what they're capable of doing right now? So getting a little bit more into the understanding of it is going to be important. Have any of you come up with situations or come up against situations when you've been doing your work and seeing maybe this has happened where there's attribution error? Have you thought about it consciously?
I have done some consulting in some of the service with respect to psychological safety in the workplace, and I can tell you that an entire organization was against the chief. And in hearing some of the allegations and what was happening, and then actually sitting with the chief and getting an understanding of where he was coming from and why these decisions were made, I could see this is how this played out, right? And then trying to explain back to the masses that you need to, like, even I'm going to use your language, but stress test your assumptions. You guys are all coming together thinking the worst of the worst when you're not even having grace for him right now to try to do the right things, right? So, yeah.
Those are very common situations. And I like your expression about not having grace, but mobbing, which I believe you talked about yesterday, mobbing is group bullying. I think it is particularly prone to attribution error and confirmation bias. That's what feeds it, is these assumptions about somebody. And then it just starts to snowball because everybody's talking about that person and everybody's giving examples without even thinking, is that example real? Is it objective? And so if you're going to look for two things in investigations, these are the things, because we have standard language in our investigation reports about those two biases because they come up all the time. It's going to be important when you assess someone's credibility because you're looking not just credibility, are they sincere? Do they believe what they're saying? because I think most of the time in investigations, people believe what they're saying, but there's also reliability. Is their evidence reliable? And it's not reliable if they're completely biased and not objective. They're not objective because they're seeing something that isn't actually there. So really important for us as investigators to think about those things when we are listening to what people have to say. The other one is authority bias, also called role effect bias, which is basically giving more deference to somebody in a more senior role. And that happens a lot. So again, we have to stress test our assumptions. Am I accepting that person's evidence over somebody else's because I feel they have more gravitas because they are in a more senior role? So overcoming biases is an ongoing process. You're never going to be able to say, okay, I've done these 4 things and now I am completely impartial, because we will never be completely impartial. We have to implement strategies to protect ourselves from becoming biased and for making sure we're examining indicators of bias when we're doing investigations. And one of them is just being aware that it's possible. So even our conversations today, but I will ask myself when I'm doing investigations, are there any biases that are happening here? Are there any situations like the one Tammy just described where you got a group of people? Actually asking yourself that question. And then creating an opposite hypothesis. So that person is lazy, or they weren't trained properly, or they learned from somebody who taught them things the wrong way. What's another possible explanation? And does the evidence align under that explanation? Again, it's a stress test. Is there another possible explanation? And often you're getting 2 different explanations, complainant and respondent, so you can kind of line them up that way. But you'd also have to be able to defend why you're taking that view. Why do you think that this is accurate? You have to be able to defend that and look through that. The other thing that it's another investigator that I've worked with, and she has a really good technique, which has been proven psychologically to help, but it seems a bit like an interesting one, where you set an intention. So for example, before you start making your findings, you've interviewed everybody, you've reviewed all the documents, you literally write down, I am going to be impartial and neutral and objective when I review these allegations, or I'm going to be conscious of my biases. Whatever it is you need to do to prime your mind will actually, in the background of your brain, cause you to live that intention. Sounds like a woo-woo psychology thing, but it actually does work, and I've tried it. So just putting that awareness out there, making sure that you can defend your findings, because one of the challenging things with these types of investigations is they are not clear-cut at all. Workplace violence, somebody punching somebody or pushing somebody or even groping somebody, those are more clear-cut. But when it comes to they aren't being nice to me, they're disrespecting me, they're not talking to me, they think they're better than me, all of those things, deep psychological impacts and influences to that. Am I reacting to that supervisor, or is that supervisor reminding me of somebody in a position of authority from my childhood and they're just like them? Like there's all this baggage that we carry. And your job as an investigator is not to be a psychologist, but your job is to not just accept things at face value and do a little bit more of an analysis. So that's our section on bias. But before we move into the next part, does anybody have any questions or any techniques that you have tried that you think have been really helpful in addressing bias? Love to hear from you. This is actually a great opportunity for you to share with each other, because learning from different services and how you approach things is part of the benefit of being together in a program like this.
I can just say that I have a partner when I do some of this consulting work. And because I have trauma carried over from being a senior officer and being severely harassed and bullied and oppressed for about 5 years, I have that trauma brain. And when I go down the familiarity, like what I see happening, and I express, my partner, my co-chair there, she knows of my past, so she automatically will bring it forward and have a more open, if you will, view of what's happening and gives me another perspective. So for me, that's what keeps me balanced and not thinking everybody's rotten and, believe the victim all the time. So giving me that other perspective really helps. And the fact that she knows where I come from and, where I am now. So that helps.
That's really helpful. And what a great strategy that is, because there will be things that are similar to an experience we may have had in our past. So asking somebody else to peer review and kind of saying, look, here's what I'm worried about because I've experienced something similar and I want to make sure that's not influencing my evaluation or analysis, that can be really helpful. Even just knowing that about yourself can be helpful. And most of us have experienced something, whether it's being bullied as a kid or experiencing disrespect or discrimination in some capacity. And so it can make our lenses clouded a little bit by that. So just making sure we're putting in place efforts. We're never going to be 100%, but if you're ever called upon to defend your investigation, being able to say, these are the steps I took to make sure that my findings were accurate will go a long way. Okay, so now I want to talk about the investigation process more generally. So our focus for today will be primarily around things like interviewing and assembling the allegations that you will be presenting. And one of the things I want us to really think about, and I mentioned this in the intro, is about not causing further harm. An investigation is a terrible process for everybody. Nobody wants to participate in these things. You might get the odd person that is bringing something because they're malicious and they want to cause harm to someone. Yes, that will happen. But in my experience, over the last 30 years, I would say that's maybe one or two people that have wanted to be part of an investigation process because they want to screw somebody over. Most people don't want to be there. Most people just want things to stop and to go away. Respondents, of course, don't want to be part of a process. Who would ever want to be named in an investigation? And witnesses often don't want to participate because they are worried about the implications on their reputation. Will they be isolated or ostracized because they participated? So we don't want to use a process that will cause further harm. And so as we go on and talk about the process, I'm going to give you some idea of what we can do that will reduce the risk of harm. It will be harmful, it will be stressful for everyone, but reducing that risk of harm is important. There was an academic, she's based in BC, she's a professor, and she did some research on people's reactions to having participated in an investigation. And she asked questions about whether they perceived the process as fair and whether if they had a situation in the future, would they be likely to complain? When she looked at complainants, they were more likely to perceive that the investigation as fair and more likely to want to file a complaint again if their allegations were substantiated. No big surprise, right? So if somebody pours their heart out, they put together allegations, and then the investigation says it's not substantiated, they're going to feel deflated. Nobody believed me. So they're less likely to feel satisfied with the process. She then asked the same question of respondents, and you would think the answer would be if it's not substantiated, if they're vindicated, they feel the process is fair, and they might file a complaint themselves if they ever experienced it. But that is not actually true. Respondents never think the process is fair. Why do you think that is? Why would a respondent say, I don't care what the outcome was? What do you think that negative association to an investigation would be related to for a respondent? Thoughts on that one?
Well, I'm going to take a stab and say I think substantiated or not, they feel like there's a reputational risk to them for just having even been included. So, entering into this investigation. So the outcome, I'm sure, is better if it's unsubstantiated for them, but just being called into it is stressful.
It is, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's the reputational harm that causes upset to people. It's that now everybody knows there were witnesses called in. This is going to be a cloud over my career and my reputation forever, even if I'm vindicated. So we have to be mindful of that in how we navigate the process and trying to make it as comfortable and as fair as possible for everyone. And I think too often what I have seen with investigations is a bit of an assumption that what you're trying to prove is that the respondent did it instead of trying to find out factually what happened. As I mentioned, so much of this is psychological. It is very possible that someone believes what they're saying, but it can't be substantiated because they're not objective, because there's another side to the story. So approaching this not as giving a complainant the benefit of the doubt, but really just trying to help everyone navigate this process in a fair way is important. And that's why we do things like giving a respondent the allegations ahead of time so they have an opportunity to review them, which I'm going to come back to in a moment. So
Can I-
oh no, go
can I
ahead, go
just-
ahead.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? Knowing
absolutely.
knowing that to be true, and I know that you have the best practices document and just putting it out to actual investigators that are here, knowing how much damage this could do to somebody psychologically, even found guilty or not guilty or validated. Is there any follow-up pieces after an investigation, or are we still just doing the, okay, you were vindicated or you were held responsible, you're off to your own devise, I guess, to deal with after the fact? Do you know what I mean? Does anybody ever do any follow-up work with the people that were accused of something or investigated? I'm just wondering.
So let's hear from some of the other services. What are you doing as your, we'll call it aftercare, or the
Yeah.
after the investigation pieces? What are you doing? Are you just notifying people that investigation complete, not substantiated, or are you meeting with people? Fill us in on what you're actually doing in practice.
In Ottawa, we don't actually personally follow up, but we offer the wellness. We have our wellness program. That's about as much as we can do to follow up and make sure that everybody has access to it.
Mm-hmm. Other services, what are you doing?
I can speak for Niagara, for some of them anyway. And I think we bit down a bit of a change with we have our member support unit and offer support kind of throughout the whole process. But I feel like our processes are sort of for respectful workplace ones. There's a committee, myself, like the chief's executive officer, the professional standards inspector, and the director of human resources. So one of us, the three of us, would go to the person, both the person that's the respondent or persons, and the complainant to kind of go through that. Yes, this was the result of this investigation, and this is why. So, because a lot of times there's no answer because it's either unsubstantiated and they think, well, why did I bother doing this? Right? So you're kind of helping him them through that way, or vice versa. The respondent officers are saying, I told you this was nothing from the start. So again, I feel like that personal conversation or explanation goes a lot further than here's your report and go talk to the association or whatever you might do.
That's an excellent point, Linda. Thank you. Anyone else have thoughts on what you have been doing or even thinking of doing in that regard? So this is not just an issue in policing. It's an investigation. It's an issue in investigations in general. And one of the things that a lot of organizations do is very poor resolution pieces. So I've seen situations where somebody just gets an email that says not substantiated or substantiated, whether it's complainant or respondent. Okay, everybody back to work. And someone may have poured hours and hours and hours of time either putting together a complaint or responding to it. And then I don't understand. Why were these findings made? What led to that? And so I think more organizations are starting towards a debrief meeting that explains the findings. I've been asked to do them. Sometimes people just get mad at the investigator, but I think really helping people to understand the basis for the findings. And I kind of feel like we owe it to people to talk about it with them because it's a monumental event in somebody's life. And if we don't at least do an in-person meeting to debrief the findings, I think it is more likely that people won't accept it. It's actually something that leads to more grievances and litigation as well, human rights complaints, when people feel like, well, you just didn't understand what I was saying. And if you can say we did understand, and we're not saying it didn't happen, we're saying based on the evidence in front of us, we can't substantiate that it happened. That's often how I like to express it, but really helping people to understand why you landed where you did. And if you can't defend that, that may mean you probably have to do a little bit more work on how you got to your conclusions. Any thoughts or questions on that part of navigating the process? Okay, so what do you think the single biggest complaint about investigation processes is? And now I'd like everybody to put this in the chat. What do you think the single biggest complaint is? So we've got 3 in so far. How long they take takes too long. Nothing will be done. So if you haven't added to the chat, put it in there because we'll try and get a sense as to where everybody lands. No repercussions. Thank you. Okay, so you've hit on the 2 biggest ones. From my perspective, the one that comes up the most is taking too long. Part of it is that people have a misconception about how quickly an investigation can be concluded. So assuming that it can be wrapped up in a matter of a couple of weeks. So part of it is expectation management. So when you're meeting with people, here are the steps that have to be taken. And in all likelihood, I think this will take 2 months or 3 months because I have to meet with numerous witnesses, and then keeping people up to date in the process. And maybe that's a designated individual and not the investigator who does that, but periodically touching base with people and saying, I'm now at this stage. But let's say you file a complaint, you don't know whether the respondent has been spoken to, you don't know if witnesses have been interviewed, and you're looking around all the time, not knowing who knows what or what stage it's at. So managing expectations around how long it will take and what is actually happening, what stage it is at, will be really helpful in reducing that stress and making the process more psychologically safe for people. What barriers do you have in moving it quickly? Because that is one of the key things we need to do. What are some of the things that you've bumped up against that have made it hard to move it along faster than you'd like?
Workload is one of them. People being off work or annual leave when they take 3 to 4 weeks at a time, it just holds everything back.
Are there times when you're able to do other tasks while you're waiting? Is that something you've been able to do? I mean, sometimes you can't. It's a key person and everything rides on that. But have there been times when you've been able to do other things while someone's off?
Of course, yeah. Depending on the investigation, there's other steps we can take to get done prior to any interviews. But in regards to holdups, that's the biggest issue.
Yeah, I find that's one of the bigger ones is people's availability. So again, managing expectations and letting people know I haven't been able to meet with the respondent yet because she's on leave. I'm expecting that won't happen for another month. People are so grateful when you at least tell them that much, even if it doesn't change the fact that it's going to take a little bit longer. The other thing we have done is internally set some expectations for how timelines should move. So we interview the complainant. Our goal is to have a summary of the complainant's allegations completed within 2 to 3 days. It depends on the complexity of the investigation, but we actually have a standard that we try to meet in terms of getting it to move quickly. One of the things I did with AI, and I can't find it now, but I asked it if I just miss a day here and a day there. So instead of interviewing someone 2 days after the complainant interview, it's 4 days after the complainant interview, and I stretch out witness interviews. And it was amazing how quickly those little individual gaps, if you will, add to the entire length of the investigation. It can add another month or two just by not keeping things as close in time as possible. So even as we are looking at investigations, and they're little projects really, and when we project manage them, thinking of how close together can I get things, and anywhere where we can close that gap will help, obviously, with the overall length of the investigation. So that's a strategy that I have typically used, and we have divided ours down between simple, moderate, and complex. So our expectation of a simple investigation is that it's going to get done in a matter of a few weeks. A moderate one might take a couple of months. A complex one, the complex ones vary greatly. It might take 4 or 5 months. So really trying to map that out, but dividing it. And we actually have started tracking how often we're meeting those targets so that we can improve that performance. It's that idea if you start to pay attention to these things, you'll be able to resolve them. And so if you want to take away that big complaint about not moving quickly enough, you're going to have to take some steps to try and address that. Some of them are going to be volume related, workload related. You're not going to be able to fix them, but some of them you might be able to by turning your mind to some strategies. Have any of you implemented any other strategies around moving them along quickly? Okay. So are you familiar, or maybe you're not, with the Code of Practice? So I will tell you about it, as I don't know if Natasha did yesterday, but the Ministry of Labor put out a Code of Practice for conducting workplace investigations. And if you haven't read it, I suggest you look at it. Now, the best practice document that was put together for the working group for respectful workplaces and policing, that took into account the Code of Practice. And the Code of Practice says investigations should be completed within 90 days unless there are extenuating circumstances. And it gives examples of when there might be an extenuating circumstance. For example, more than 5 witnesses. They're key witnesses. There's more than 5. That's going to make it take longer. Someone's unavailable due to illness, which we've already talked about, or perhaps there's a criminal or regulatory investigation that kind of has to proceed first, has to be given precedence. That might impact your timelines. But if you keep that in mind as a goal, that will be helpful, because the requirement of all employers, including police services, is that investigations be conducted in a timely manner, and that's your 90-day window. So looking at making sure that you at least get it in within 90 days. For us, it goes back to, if it's a simple investigation, we don't use the 90 days as our benchmark. We use something closer to 30 days or 45 days. Okay, so any thoughts on that part of the process? Anything else? Because we're now going to talk about the attributes of a good investigator. Okay, so this is something where I want you to write into the chat again. So if anybody wasn't using the chat before, please use it now. And I just want you to write down, what do you think makes for a good investigator? What personal attributes or personalities or traits are helpful to really be able to do this type of investigation work? Because this is different than a criminal investigation. Linda has patience. So yes, that's a very important one. What other attributes are helpful? Curious and open-minded, not singly minded, yes. Disciplined listening is important. What else do we have? So with patience, curious and open-minded, recognizing bias, yes, thank you. Creating a safe space. Empathetic to both sides. Absolutely. So I want to come back to 2 of those right now. So Brenda, empathetic to both sides. What does that mean to you in practice? What does that look like? How do you demonstrate empathy to both sides?
Yeah, I think, a bias could be to assume the, respondent is this sort of terrible villain person, but sometimes they might not have known it could have been impactful in the way that it was, and they might, and they might need to improve in their ways. And of course, if they cross the line, that's different. I do think there's sometimes, these people have their own wellness issues, or they're hurt, or they're frustrated for whatever reasons they are. And I just think being empathetic to whatever the motivator for their behavior was can go a long way to find out the truth of the matter, instead of sort of poking at them and shutting them down. You'll get more out of them if you're, are empathetic, open, and understanding to whatever their experience was as well. So I think you have to sort of be open and careful, and give that same courtesy to both sides.
And that's very well stated, because the goal is to get the information. And if people feel like you've already decided they're a bad person, and they're going to assume that you've already made a decision, then they're going to shut down. We want to get them talking. We want to get them to feel heard. So that would be very important. And Tammy, what did you mean when you were talking about creating a safe space?
That's a lot of things for me. It is about being present, having that disciplined listening, which means you're watching everything, like body language, how they're reacting, is their physical response. Even if you don't like what they're saying, or even if you have these biases against the situation, but and being open to it. And pause, like allowing them to pause and take their time when they're trying to explain things to you. It doesn't always have to be the rush. Making sure that they feel heard. And that could be many ways of doing that. Physical, like, thank you for sharing that, or acknowledging some vulnerability. I also think about their well-being, like if they need to take breaks, or if they need to step out of the room. And like, what do they need actually to have a fulsome conversation from you? Like, what is it that what they need?
Yeah.
So it's all those things. And I think it's also coming from that big place of curiosity as opposed to judgment. And that is one of my sticky notes I have up all the time, because I tend to sit in a space of judgment a lot. And it's like, how do you get to the truth if you don't become curious as to why this happened and what's going on? So, and asking open-ended questions as opposed to, those closed questions, like letting them tell you their story, both of them, the respondent and the complainant, and any of your witnesses.
I think being curious is probably going to help with a lot of the other things. It helps with not getting single-minded. It helps with bias. It's like being curious, like what's really going on here? And that's kind of the overarching question that I ask myself, what's really going on here? It's not usually exactly what people are presenting. Maybe there's some past history between people that's influencing how they're engaging with each other. So having that engagement with what is happening in people's perspectives, I think, can be really helpful. And then the other thing, which seems obvious, is ensuring confidentiality. And the Code of Practice actually says you have a duty to help maintain confidentiality. And that's important. And I worked on one investigation where it wasn't an investigator, but it was a staff sergeant who came in and said, 2 of our members are going to be off for a little while. And I can't tell you why, but I mean, those are just the nicest guys. And I can't believe this happened to them. And it was very obvious that they had been identified as respondents in a complaint. And that wasn't helpful. So he hadn't spilled the beans. He hadn't said exactly what was happening, but had said enough. And that just created all kinds of other factions and problems within that work group. And it was already a fractured work group. So making sure that not just you're maintaining confidentiality, but making sure others are as well. And so we frequently include reminders about confidentiality. It can be included in policies. We send a letter, you would have a notice of investigation, reminders about confidentiality when doing the opening with people, reminding them about confidentiality, and then invoking discipline if possible or necessary when people breach that. Do any of you use confidentiality agreements when you are investigating? You can just put a yes in the chat if you do. No yeses in the chat, so it looks like perhaps you're not. So that is one of the things that we strongly advocate for. Now, some organizations don't call it a confidentiality agreement, they call it a confidentiality acknowledgement because their union doesn't want them signing something that says agreement. But it can cover things like you're not to talk about the fact a complaint was even filed. And I did one investigation once where it was in fire, and it was the fire chief went out after talking to me and said, well, I can't tell you what it was about, but I just met with a lawyer about an investigation, and I don't think that this should have been filed. And just like, shut up. It's not just about not talking about the specifics or the individuals who are involved. Don't talk about the fact that there's an investigation. So what was discussed in the interview, your opinions on it, who else might be participating, just stop talking. So that's going to be a very important piece. Okay, just figuring out. So let's talk about conducting interviews. Move my pages here. So we currently use video interviews. Before the pandemic, we were always interviewing people in person. And then once the pandemic hit, it's like, well, all our investigations have to pause for the next 2 weeks until this pandemic thing is resolved. And of course, it continued. And so we had to look at alternatives. So for us as external investigators, we switched to doing video interviews, thinking that once the pandemic's over, we're going to go back to meeting with people in person because, of course, those are better interviews. And I have to tell you, I don't agree. I have very firmly come to the conclusion that video interviews are better. They're better for individuals. I think they feel more comfortable than having somebody sitting across from them, maybe taking notes on a laptop or a computer. Where it's possible, they might be able to do the interview from home or having a support animal with them or whatever it is. But I find that video interviews work better. I'm able to see the person. So if it comes to assessing their answers or getting a read on their reactions from body language, I can still do all of that. It is less personal though. So if they are emotional, it's a little bit harder to soothe those emotions. You lose that energy bit, but I love video interviews. I'm curious though, for you, are you still all doing them in person? Have you started doing video interviews? I'm not saying you need to switch. I'm just telling you my experience of them. But any thoughts on video interviewing? Have you tried it? If you're still doing in-person interviews, where are you doing them? Are you doing them in a space that's private, or would other people be able to see that they are there?
I can speak for Niagara. We do ours generally in person, just so you have that sort of more personal connection with the member, and it's always done somewhere in a private meeting room and or like at the association, for instance, if that's where the member wants to be.
Okay. So doing in-person audio, and I should have clarified, I was just talking about like a Zoom interview, not necessarily recording the video. Although I like to record audio versus video. I feel like it's less intimidating for people. So I typically do that. Any other thoughts on why in-person has worked better for you?
For us at APS, we're throughout the province from London to Thunder Bay, so I'll find an off-site location outside of the police service for mostly conduct interviews, but I've done some interviews under harassment concerns for her, and they're typically just at a hotel meeting room, like a conference room. So we're all over the place. So and I've only done a couple where I've used our Axon or our video interview, but I typically just do audio statements.
Okay. And when you have done them remotely, like just we'll call them Zoom interviews, has that worked well for you? Because it would seem to me that for you in particular, you've got these geographic issues where you got to go all over the place, that it might be easier to do them with Zoom interviews. But it sounds like you're...
Yeah, I prefer to meet with the complainants face to face. But I try to avoid Zoom or Zoom interviews.
Okay.
Just I perhaps it's mostly for just conduct matters and witness. I'll just typically meet them face to face in kind of a neutral location. So probably a good idea to do it by Zoom but I know in the past, especially with different locations, nothing's more frustrating than having connectivity issues. Some of our community members or complainants do have limited locations have limited Wi-Fi access. So I sometimes think for us and our geographical locations is best to meet face to face,
And that
especially
makes sense.
it,
Yes.
especially with the history with Indigenous complainants with police. We want to make sure that they know we're taking their concerns seriously, and we meet them personally, and that means a lot to our communities anyway, and the people involved. So.
Yeah, and I certainly think if it's an allegation that's coming from an external person, that you would definitely want to do that in
Mhm.
person. I'm thinking more about harassment investigations, but you
No, that's right.
also have to think about how adept are they at using a computer. If it's not something they do as part of their job, they're not accustomed to Zoom, period, that can add a layer of intimidation to it. Like whatever you do should be the thing that makes it easiest for them, that makes it safest for them. So it's not about your convenience, it's what works for them. There was an article that somebody wrote. She had been sexually assaulted and twice, sadly, and had the experience of a video trial and an in-person trial. And it was all about why she felt the video trial was safer for her. She didn't have to worry about bumping into the accused at the elevator afterwards. She wasn't sitting in this courtroom where the judge is sitting up high. There was a lot of things that made it easier on her. So it is something I think worth turning your mind to. Are there times when one or the other makes more sense? So it's not an absolute on either side, but are there times when this could be a better option for you? No matter what you do. Oh, so Greg, sorry, go ahead. Are you going to say
No, I
something?
just said absolutely.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, so the other things that you can do to help that make it psychologically safer, allowing a support person or even a therapy animal to be there, taking breaks. Now, here's one of the things from a trauma aware perspective is giving people agency over whatever they can have agency over, because that helps people feel in control. I feel a loss of control, whether I'm a complainant or respondent, or for that matter, even a witness. Everything's been taken away from me. Somebody else is managing it. So giving people control over things can be as simple as saying, please let me know when you want to take a break. Or before you start the interview, saying, are you ready to begin? Seem like meaningless things, but they're actually quite meaningful. But even touching base, like we've been at this now for an hour. Would you like 5 minutes? Do you need to grab a glass of water? Whatever works for you. Also doing multiple meetings. Now, some people want the marathon. I'll sit with you for 8 hours if that's what it takes to tell you my story. But sometimes that's too hard on people. And so talking to them about what works better for you. It's also hard on an investigator to sit there for 8 hours and absorb everything. But we're really trying to think about the perspective of the person. I had someone who arranged to have therapy after each meeting. And so the agreement we had was no more than 2 hours. And at the end of each 2 hour block, she would meet with her therapist. So those are some strategies that you can employ to try and make it easier. Now, if it's a much more straightforward investigation, it's maybe an exchange of disrespectful words and on one or two occasions, you might not need to get into these kind of extensive strategies. But where you're dealing with ongoing things, somebody's been mobbed, or there's racial or sexual harassment, or something that's a little more serious, really trying to think about what strategies you can invoke to make it easier on them to navigate the process. Any other strategies that you've thought of? Because Tammy also mentioned some things about making a safe space, but anything else? Okay, we've covered some of what's on these next slides. So one of the things that Tammy did mention was things like giving people time to answer. And I will often say to a respondent, first of all, I'll start with, I've been doing this long enough to know there's more than one side to the story. There's more than one perspective on things. I'm here to understand yours. I haven't made any decisions, but also giving them time to answer. And sometimes there's this tendency to want to jump in and ask another question and to follow up when there's a pause. Don't do that. Give people time to collect their thoughts, to think about their answer, to formulate it. And that can be an important part of making them feel heard. And then asking about corroborating evidence. Now, what do you have to prove that? But was anybody else present? Is there anyone else that I can speak to? Were there any text messages that you exchanged or any emails? We're seeing lots of stuff happen in text exchanges or Teams messages or WhatsApp. Those types of things can be important. So really giving people time so that they feel heard and feel that the process is safer. Okay, we are going to take our first break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a few challenging situations. So I have just 1:15. So let's meet up again at 10:30. We'll see you in about 15 minutes.
Can I ask a question with that?
Absolutely.
Do you investigate every anonymous complaint? Who picks and chooses what gets investigated and what doesn't?
Well, I think that's a challenging one. So the challenges with, I'll come back to answering it, but one of the challenges, or many of the challenges with anonymous ones, is you don't know who has brought the complaints. You don't know their motive, right? Are they doing this to cause harm? And so they're hiding behind anonymity so that you can't come after them. Come after them's the wrong expression, but there can be no repercussions against them if they're worried about repercussions. But you can't assess their credibility. You can't provide due process to the respondent because you can't say this person alleges this and what do you have to say about that. But there is a duty to investigate when incidents come to your attention. So under the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it says you have a duty to investigate complaints and incidents that come to your attention. So if you've got an anonymous complaint, that is an incident that has come to your attention. The other wording, though, from the Occupational Health and Safety Act is that is appropriate in the circumstances. So then let's come back to what is appropriate in the circumstances. If it is something where it's going to be impossible to investigate, then what's appropriate in the circumstances may not be much. Some organizations have whistleblower apps where you can correspond with the whistleblower without their identity ever being revealed. And so in those circumstances, there is a means of writing back to them and saying, we'd like to know a little bit more to at least be able to look into this further. But if you've got no starting point, that sergeant's a jerk and is disrespectful to everyone, that's going to be tougher. You could do a bit of an assessment. It doesn't count as an investigation, but you could say, we're hearing rumblings in a particular work group. We know that everyone that reports into this sergeant, there's just little bits of gossip. We're maybe hearing things through the association, but nobody wants to come forward. So you could do an assessment. That's not an investigation. So anything that comes out of that couldn't be used against the person who's identified as the problem, in this case, the sergeant. You couldn't use it against them because they've had no opportunity to have specific allegations presented to them to respond. But it could be the gateway to that. You could hear enough to say, okay, now we need to convert this to an investigation. The other thing that organizations will do is call something an employer-initiated investigation or a service-initiated investigation. So we don't have a complainant, but we have enough that we have an obligation to proceed. We're just not calling anyone in particular the complainant. That could also be used when somebody's really reluctant to come forward. They've come in person to say, I'm having this problem, but I just want you to know I don't want to be the complainant. Then that may be a way of working around that. Now, if they're not a complainant and they're just effectively a witness, they might not get information about the outcome afterwards. So that may be something to explain to them. But have any of you used processes like this, like an employer-initiated investigation or some way in addition to an assessment of navigating an anonymous one?
I'm in one right now. It's more of a conduct investigation, but one of the issues that was brought up to me is the emphasis on protecting the anonymity of it's basically a whistleblower complaint, but protecting the anonymity of the whistleblower, which I'm finding a little bit challenging, but I'm wondering how much weight or how cognizant of you have to be during your investigation to keep that in mind.
So it's a whistleblower that is internal to your service, or do you know? Like, is this a harassment thing, or what's the allegation?
It's an internal conduct complaint. However, there is a racial component to it that could be that could potentially roll into a harassment complaint.
Okay. And so then the question is, do I have to identify the person who raised the allegation? You don't necessarily have to say this person raised the allegation, but in order for somebody to respond to it, they're going to have to know enough to be able to respond. So if it's two people alone in a room, they're going to know that the person who said there was racist comments made is likely the other person in the room. So procedural fairness will provide that you cannot necessarily just say, I will never identify who you are. The other person will never know it was you. You can't provide that absolute protection because it has to be fair to the respondent. The respondent has to know enough to be able to respond to the allegation. And if you, by protecting that whistleblower, if you will, can't give that, then you probably can't proceed with it much further because it's not fair to the respondent. Does that make sense, John?
Yes, it does. Thanks. It's just I had a different opinion of the direction I was getting, so that clears it up. Thanks.
Okay, good. No problem. They are difficult, but at the end of the day, we always have to think procedural fairness. If this were ever reviewed by another body, would they feel that a balance has been achieved for all parties? Because this is something that's important for all parties. So that's a good thing to consider. Okay, the next thing that often comes up in investigations is whether to expand an investigation. And we often hear the expression scope creep, that it starts out as one thing and then you hear more and more and more and more. And then the next thing you know, it has ballooned into something bigger. What strategies have you used to prevent things from getting bigger? Because the bigger it gets, the harder it is to close it off and move on. Any thoughts on what has worked for you? What criteria would you use that would cause you to expand an investigation as opposed to not including it? Okay, so for me, typically I try to do scope restriction versus scope creep. Workplace investigations, the more people you get involved, the more likely it is that the working relationships will become fractured and damaged. So we try to limit the number of people that are involved. We try to limit them from becoming bigger. And so what I will look at is, are there other respondents? So it's the same basic fact pattern, but maybe it's not just one sergeant the allegations are being raised against. Maybe it's the sergeant, a constable, and a staff sergeant. And so it doesn't make sense to have people talk about things multiple times. So we want to make it one investigation so that we're not traumatizing people by making them speak about the same set of facts multiple times. So that may be a time when you expand it. There may be other incidents that are just closely tied to the core allegation, then you might want to expand it. But if it's something new, let's say Sergeant says, well, actually, I've been harassed too. You might say, okay, you file your complaint and we can address it separately. And maybe they're done in tandem, but you've got to be always conscious that you don't want people to have to duplicate or repeat their stories multiple times, but you also don't want things to expand beyond the original scope because that will take longer. The other thing to look for is similarity of issues or the resources that are required to do it. So these are some of the things that can influence whether or not to expand it. I think in policing, you are accustomed to no stone unturned, interviewing whatever witnesses there happen to be. In a workplace harassment investigation, the lens might be slightly different because what you're looking to do is to not involve anyone that you don't need to involve. It's kind of that simple. Like, don't make it bigger than it needs to be. So if you have enough witnesses that you can establish something, or it's not determinative of anything, this particular piece of information, then maybe you don't expand that far. You would need to explain in your report why you chose not to interview certain witnesses. For example, if someone's just a character witness, I can tell you that Lauren's the nicest person ever and she wouldn't do that. Well, you weren't there when Lauren said these things, and so that makes you not really eligible as a witness. But trying to limit things. So it's not making it as expansive as possible. It's making it something that you can defend, but that keeps it within a reasonable scope. Okay, so we're now going to do an activity, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here. And it's an activity that is in the LMS, and it is called How Do You Handle This? So if you go into our MLS and look for the How Do You Handle This, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. I'm just going to do 2. So the Ottawa group, you can all chat together, and the other 4 of you I'll put into a breakout room through Zoom. And I want you to go through each scenario, just go through them one by one because they're short. Like the first one is complain and insist you interview a particular witness, and if you don't, the investigation will be a sham. And then you're going to talk together about how you handle that particular scenario. So I'm going to give you 25 minutes. So you've got just over a minute for each scenario to discuss them to stay on track. So I'll put you into these breakout rooms, which I set up ahead of time. Okay, so there were quite a few scenarios there for you to discuss, but let's quickly run through them. Some of them may be easier to answer than others, but we'll try and identify where you might have gotten stuck a little bit. So the first one is the complainant insists you interview a particular witness and says if you don't, the investigation will be a sham, but the witness doesn't work for the service anymore. How did you decide to handle that one?
Because we just had one like this, ironically. And there were 2 witnesses, one that was retired, one that was worked for another service. So we took the initiative to reach out to both. The retired one essentially said, no, thank you. And the one with the other service actually did interview. So that was, we were able to explain that to the complainant saying, we tried, but we can't force someone to interview. And that was it.
That's great. So you're at least able to show that you did something. You didn't ignore them. What about our virtual breakout group? What did you come up with as a strategy?
Part of it was the same as the other group there, Linda said. But other part of it would I'd directly ask the witness in regards to the complainant in regards to what information the witness is going to provide, just so I have a better understanding of what they feel would be a sham if we didn't interview them. I think it's important to kind of get their perspective on things, and then again try to reach out and do our best to get that witness in.
Yeah, there's some distress to a term like sham, whether it's anger or distrust to the process. So great to handle. Can we interview those people? That's critical. Being able to say what you did, but also not ignoring the distress or the meaning behind them saying that. Like, are you concerned about this process? What do you need to see to help you feel like the process is a fair one for you? Can be a way of approaching it. Okay. Number 2, the respondent goes on an extended sick leave after receiving the complaint and won't respond to requests for interviews. So our virtual breakout group, that would be our groups from everywhere but Ottawa. What did you come up with as a strategy for that one? So that's John Paul, Tammy.
Well, I don't do this, but the other
Okay.
people in the group. Linda,
So
you
what did your
talk.
group decide?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to the other group. Our suggestion was confirmed like either through the association if there's a possibility for them to assist in getting that person in. Or my other thought was in our history, it's to get medical to confirm through HR to confirm that there actually is an issue preventing them from. We don't know if it's psychological or otherwise. So essentially, making an effort to attempt and give them the opportunity to interview. And we're not going to hold the process for a significant amount of time. We'll give them some time, but we still have an investigation to do because there's people on the other end of that are waiting, right? So it's not a matter of I'm out of the workplace, the end. It's we still have to continue with our investigation at some point.
I agree with that. Ottawa Group, did you have any other strategies that you use?
Linda hit it out of the park. That was perfect, kind of what we were into. So
And I think the bottom line is you treat it like any other apps. And so if HR would normally, get medical or whatever it is, you do that. One of the other things that can be helpful is to say sometimes dealing with these things actually helps with your well-being, whether it's physical or mental, like just getting it out of the way. So if you feel that you can participate, it might actually help you to do so. But we can put in place measures to protect you, like the example I gave earlier of giving somebody 2-hour windows followed by a therapy appointment. Like we're here to support you, but we do think it would be helpful to keep going. So there are limits on what you can do, but at least making those attempts, I think, would be helpful. Okay, then we have the respondent to request a full copy of the complaint before they will meet with you. And maybe your process is to provide the written complaint to them. That was the process a lot of organizations used in the early years. Most of us don't do that anymore because complaints are often not written in a way that was intended for the respondent to see. Maybe they've used harsh language. Maybe they mention other people or other things that wouldn't really go to that respondent. But so let's start with what would you do when they say they need the full copy of the complaint? So the virtual breakout group. So I will call you the Ottawa group and the virtual group. So the virtual group will start with you. What did you decide you would do with the respondent in that situation?
We would give them a detailed summary, not the full report. And like the allegations. So they had enough information to answer, but not the specifics of the entirety of the memo or the report or the memo essentially.
And I think that's always the tricky part. How much information do you give when you give them the allegations? So over to the Ottawa group, if your response is the same, like we would give them the allegations, how do you decide what's the right amount of detail do you give? Do you give everything you've received, or are you just basically giving a high level of the allegations?
yeah, exactly. We'll just provide a summary of what the allegations are, like Linda said as well, and then have them have an opportunity to look at that prior to the interview with their OPA rep or union rep, I guess, and then go into more detail within the interview itself. If it's an officer, I'm not coming in until you provide me a copy of the report. I have to remind them that they are compelled to come in. So unless they want to get themselves in more hot water, that's not an option to them. So
Yes, and there is a rule of civil procedure. So it's the rules that apply when there's litigation in Ontario, and it's about pleading. So a pleading is a statement of claim, statement of defense, basically. And it says it should include the facts, but not the evidence to support the facts. And that's the piece I use when doing a summary of allegation. What is the factual allegation? Not all the proof behind that, not every text message or piece of information you've received, but just enough for them to know what it is. And what I will often say is I can provide more context when we meet. And if you need to meet with me again because you got to go back and think about it or look up text messages or something like that, we can do that. But it would take forever to write down every detail. And then it's overwhelming. We've had cases where somebody has received a summary of allegations that's like 15 pages long. That's overwhelming. That is not psychologically safe. So it's that balance between giving enough information that they can prepare and not giving so much that it's overwhelming or they're going to start nitpicking through the way you have expressed things. So that balance is pretty hard to achieve sometimes. Are any of you using AI? Do you use Copilot at all?
In what sense, like to assist with the report writing or just in
With all
asking
of it.
questions?
So we have the enterprise version of Copilot, which means that it's not in the web, it's private to our organization. But I might say, here's the complainant statement, here's my summary of allegations. Do you have any suggestions for how I shorten this? Or what would you see as evidence versus a factual allegation? I work with it quite a bit, actually, in investigations. I don't use it to do my work. I use it to help test my works, the stress testing piece. Like, where would you flag this as being evidence versus facts? I don't always agree with it, but sometimes it will give me an analysis that I hadn't thought about. So
it's definitely a
we
tool
also-
that we've used for sure in different aspects. It's definitely helpful, but like you said, right, a lot of it's fact checking and making sure that we're getting the proper information, but it's definitely helpful tool.
Which AI is helpful for you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it can't supplement your judgment and it can't substitute for you doing the work. I just find it's a little bit of a fact checker or somebody, or not somebody, but something that can just test that I've done things correctly. We've created AI agents. This could be a whole other subject, but we've created AI agents that say, here's what a summary of allegations should look like, including this whole thing about facts versus evidence to support them. Please review this summary of allegations and look for these things, and then it will give me an opinion. We've done the same with reports. We've created an AI agent. Look for these things. Can this be defended? Are my factual findings supported by evidence? Is it too wordy? All of those things. And it's just stress testing your work, but it absolutely cannot substitute for judgment because so much of this is about judgment, but it's very helpful as a tool. Okay, the next one. So we're going to start with the Ottawa group on this one. A witness demands particulars of the complaint and says that's necessary for them to prepare. So usually we say to a witness, you've been asked to participate in an investigation, or we're asking you to participate in an investigation, but we don't often tell them much of anything. And I have had witnesses say, I want full particulars of this before I will participate. So thoughts on that one from our Ottawa group?
We kind of landed on no. They wouldn't get all the particulars, right? I think we could maybe give out a little bit of what the accusation is about, but in regards to particulars of people involved, none of that would be given. Again, if it's a policing thing and it's an officer, well, again, we're going to be compelled if it's a misconduct one. Other than that, again, we go lead back to witnesses. If they're not police, we can't force them to come in.
Okay, thank you. Our virtual group, did you have any thoughts on how you would manage that one?
I think we mentioned that we needed to provide them some particulars to what they're a witness to. They can't just show up to an interview without knowing what they're going to give evidence to. They may have some documented evidence in a notebook or something to that effect that they'd like to provide to the investigators. So as far as that goes, they need to know what they're a witness to in order to prepare for the interview.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the best line to draw. I want to meet with you about a particular call, so I can give you the date of the call, but they don't necessarily need to know that there's an overarching allegation of racial harassment or sexual harassment. They just need to know that they're coming to talk about this particular event. So in particular, I would like to discuss your interaction with X person on X date so that they can be prepared. Sometimes there's nothing really for them to prepare, but if you have an event or an issue or incident that they're going to be speaking to, you could tell them about that. It's that duty to keep things confidential. You only tell people what they need to know when they need to know it. So it's what's the minimum amount of information that I need to give a witness for them to be prepared. So I'm not wasting time as well, while also maintaining confidentiality. So it's that line. Okay, one of the parties asks to discuss things off the record and then provides you with information that is important to your investigation. So our virtual group, what did you decide on that one?
We didn't think anything's really off the record.
Yes, I think that's the easiest answer. If somebody says, can we go off the record for the moment? I think the answer has to be no, well, I can't go off the record. Occasionally I've said, what is your concern? Like, I can't go off the record, but let's talk about what your concern is. Why do you want this to be off the record? And then you can usually work that through. Are they concerned about retaliation? What protections are there for them on that retaliation? Maybe they want to know who will find out about it. So that can be the conversation to have. Number 6, after you've completed the investigation, you're writing the report. The complainant says, oh, by the way, here's some text messages that are related to the incidents being investigated, and you decide they actually are germane. Ottawa, what did you decide to do about that?
Obviously start with assessing the text messages and see what how relevant they are. But at that point, I think we'd be calling in the complainant for a second interview to ask some questions as to where the text messages came from, when they were there, and why all of a sudden they're coming out now. Is the big one, right? Is why we're almost done our investigation. Why did it come out at the start? So
yeah, and I think those are all pertinent questions. What I would not do is say, sorry, time's up. If you have not yet issued a report or rendered a decision, I think you've got to at least open it up to hear what they have to say, but importantly, why. And maybe they forgot about them. Like, memory's a weird thing. We think that we should remember all these things, and then it's like 2 weeks later, oh, wait a minute, I'm sure I had text messages. So it can also help even when you're interviewing people. Are there any text messages that you ever had with this person? Do you recall? Did you exchange WhatsApp messages? Were you ever in face-to-face conversations? So trying to help prod their memory, because it's like little filing cabinets in our head, right? We just want to help them open the right drawer. And so sometimes tweaking things can help them get to that right filing cabinet in their brain. My filing cabinets are all Loctite now. I've reached that point where I can't remember anything, even with somebody giving me the key. It's all gone. Okay. 2 witnesses refuse to speak to you because they're concerned about reprisals. So I'm assuming we're going to go back to Trevor's answer, which is, well, you can be compelled to attend, so you have to come. But what happens if they come and don't say anything? So yeah, you're compelled to be here, but they come in and say, I'm not saying anything. Anything you can do in that moment?
I think part of that answer is really seek out as to why they're concerned about reprisals, and I think that's the most important thing, to kind of get out of the situation with that witness before you even get started in the interview room. So you're not stuck in that interview room kind of staring at each other. You kind of get that fear out right away.
Yeah, I think that's a piece of the empathy, right? I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to rat out on somebody else. I'm afraid that I'm going to get roped into it. I'm afraid that I'm going to be next. And so really trying to get to the heart of what their worry is, and not sugarcoating it. You cannot say, it'll all be fine. You have a right to be free from retaliation. Don't worry about it, because that's not actually the reality. The reality is they may experience some kind of social ostracization. So I think being realistic about what you can offer them as reassurance will actually go a long way than if you pretend like everything's going to be okay. People will trust you more if you're honest about what could happen. I would love to get to a state in workplaces, particularly policing, where we stop blaming and isolating the person that raises the concerns. Right now, it's, oh my God, can't trust them, don't talk to them, they filed a complaint, instead of, wow, that must have been terrible for them to have filed a complaint. Like, they must be going through something, even if we don't agree with what they filed. But we automatically go to can't trust that person. And if we're going to do any work to make these things safer, that's got to be a key piece to it, where we start to get people to think your response should be a supportive response. It doesn't mean you need to side with anybody. Your response should be a supportive one, and not saying can't trust that person because they raised a complaint. I don't know how we get there other than to keep talking about that, but I think it is something we need to keep reinforcing, that if we want it to be safe for us to speak up, we have to make it safe when other people speak up. And that means not gossiping about it. Oh, did you hear that so-and-so filed a complaint? Okay, now we have the lawyer one. So a lawyer is representing a respondent, attends the interview, and keep challenging the questions and advising the respondent not to answer. I've had so many challenging ones with lawyers. Mostly lawyers that have attended interviews have been pretty good, but lots of times they want to dictate the process. So I'll let anybody who wants to answer. What do you do about the annoying lawyer who's there? Or do you even allow lawyers to be there? I allow them, including in police ones, but what have you had to manage?
You know,
It's Mel. I'm just speaking on Brenda's microphone.
I'm not.
For us, it would be obviously an OPA representative for our officers. You know, they're aware that, you know, they're not to interrupt unless it completely goes outside the scope of what we were speaking about, and it's, you know, this officer was not aware of the, you know, this information and these allegations that were going to be brought forward. Normally, we would pause the interview. Doesn't happen often, and step outside with the OPA representative and just have a discussion about not interrupting and letting the officer answer. That's how we would deal with it.
Yeah, and that letting the officer answer is an important one because often they'll be like, "Oh yeah, no, I can answer that." No, you can't because you're not a witness. So really reinforcing that. And I have seen some services let lawyers be there, and I find they are more disruptive than OPA representatives in investigations because a little bit of posturing that can happen. And you don't need to let that happen. It's your process, and there's nothing that says a lawyer has to be there, and there's nothing that says an OPA rep should be able to answer the questions for them. So I think it's more about being firm. I will often set boundaries at the beginning of an interview to say, you are here, you know, as a union rep for somebody, and that's great. If you need to confer with each other, that's fine, but I have to get the information directly from the person you're representing. So I can't receive anything from you. It has to come from them. Your role is to be supportive. So you don't get them turning into quasi lawyers where they think they need to advocate for them as well. Okay, complainant insists they will only participate if the investigator is of the same background as them. Have you had this happen, and how have you navigated it? I will start with the Ottawa group.
I haven't had it happen in a misconduct investigation, but in the criminal aspect, we've always made best efforts to have, say, for example, if it's a female victim and wanted a female investigator, we'd make our best efforts to do that. We would voice that, but in the end, the investigation has to go on, and we only have certain people available, then we have to use those investigators at our disposal. But obviously make the best efforts, and then again try to understand why they want a different investigator, gender, race, or whatever. It may be very obvious, but sometimes it's not, right? So try to understand their point of view and build that trust.
Okay, thank you. The virtual group, did you have any thoughts on that one?
We didn't get that far because we had too much discussion on the ones before that.
Well,
But
that's
we
your
agree
chance,
with
Linda.
Ottawa.
We'll still
We
hear your
agree with
thoughts.
Ottawa. We agree with Ottawa.
That's a good answer. So we have a fairly diverse group of investigators, and we'll often get calls and somebody will say, well, can we have this person and that person? It's like, okay, I know why you've chosen that person because you're looking for someone of the same particular background. We have had ones where, particularly after the events of October 23rd, where it was an issue regarding anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, where we've assembled a team of investigators that are Jewish and Muslim, or even Muslim and Palestinian, so that everybody feels that there's some representation there for them. It is tricky. I've talked to American investigators who have said that never happens. They never get called upon to do investigations based on their particular background. I don't know how true that is because I haven't done a representative sample, but I do think it is pretty common for people to say, I need somebody with lived experience. If I am Indigenous and somebody's investigating and doesn't understand the meaning behind some of why I'm concerned, then they are going to struggle to understand my allegations. So I think it is important to ask why they're looking for that particular background. If you have people that have been educated in those particular areas, maybe it's somebody that's been educated in, for example, anti-Black racism, then that can be the thing you point to, that we've had people that have had their skills enhanced. But I think it is something to at least give thought to whether you can accommodate that request. Okay, last one. Witness emails you the day after their interview and wants to retract portions of what they said. So I'm starting with the virtual group so they can't say, oh, we'll just do what Ottawa said. What'd you get?
You
Well, I'd
can't
want to know
retract
why.
your statement.
You want to know why?
Yeah.
Yes. Start with why. It looked like, Linda, you were going to say something as well.
Sorry, Linda.
That's
No,
okay.
same thing. I was just gonna say I would want to know why, but I was gonna say you can't retract it because unless it's a lie, of course, and then they're getting themselves into a whole other.
Yes. Yeah,
And
I
even
think
if it's a lie, you still can't retract it. You're going to have to indicate this was what was originally said, and this is what the variation has become. It's still not going to be retracted. Yeah, that would never happen. Eh?
and I would note that in your report. So I was contacted by the witness afterward. They changed their story or wished to modify their story or retracted these portions, but it is what they said. And you can decide, have I placed any weight on that? Or it's just that they're really worried about reprisals. And so that's why they were nervous. So I am not going to place any weight on the fact that they wanted to retract it. I'm not seeing it as them worried that they had lied. It's that they're worried about the repercussions. But it is really good in your report to document some of your rationale behind decisions you've made. Someone identified 5 witnesses, you only interviewed 3. Why did you select those? Maybe 2 people are retired and you got enough with the 3. So using your report or at least some backup notes to explain your decision making is also helpful if you get asked to defend yourself 3 years later and you don't remember anything about this investigation. So it's the same as note taking in general in policing, but having that to show your thought process and why you proceeded the way you did with interviews and evidence that you obtained. Any other thoughts or questions on any of those scenarios that we just covered? Okay.
I have a little weird question when
Yes.
we're talking about civilians, because we mostly all deal with sworn members and they're compelled. Other than I know some professions do have let's get it a little lower. Employers, I guess. If let's say you have I'm from the north, so let's use the mining industry. There's a lot of transfers within the mining industry. Whoever's paying the most bonuses, miners or managers tend to move around. And let's say you're investigating something from your employer, and then you go, and then let's say one of the supervisors or higher ups have left to start another mine, but they need to be a witness, or they need to we need to extract information from them. Is there any do you see a lot of mining or different businesses at higher levels, like ownerships or employers, allow them or kind of influence them to engage in the investigation even though they don't have to?
Yeah, we've certainly seen situations where we've reached out to the employer themselves to say, look, we need to interview this person. Are you okay with that? And getting their clearance. You can't really compel somebody who doesn't work for you anymore. And I tend to avoid interviewing them unless I absolutely need to. And sometimes I do because I can't enforce confidentiality on them. Right? I can say, I'd like you to keep this confidential, but it doesn't have that same impact as it would if they are employed by me. So that makes it challenging too. I have had to go to people that don't work for a service or organization, but fairly infrequently, and have occasionally interacted with their employer to make sure that that happens. So that's a good point. Okay. So let's start talking about interviewing. I'm going to share my screen. I was having so much fun because I could see you all, and now I'm suddenly not going to be able to see you again. I really don't know what I've done here. Okay. Share. That wasn't what I wanted to do. There we go. So I want to talk now about interviewing. And one of the things to be mindful of is how much time to allot. be very careful that you give yourself enough time to meet with the person. I think too often there's a tendency to underestimate how long it's going to take. I never set aside less than 2 hours unless it's like I have 2 questions for that person, so that I'm not checking my clock and going, oh shoot, I've got to get to another thing. So I'm giving that window of time. Somebody may be emotional, they may be a slow talker, they may tend to go on tangents. So giving yourself enough time. And as I mentioned earlier, some people like to power through it and do really long interviews. I tend to use 2 hours as my default. And I know that in my own calendar, I've got a little bit more time if I need it, because I also need a break. I also need to make sure that I'm focused and able to hear what they're telling me, because after I get fatigued, I'm not able to really be the best investigator I need to be. Now, that may not be realistic all the time, so you have to factor that in. Would doing multiple interviews mean it never gets done? Then that's going to be a factor that leads you to do a longer one. I have time between interviews here, and that really only comes up if you've got interviews that are back to back and you're doing them in person and they're coming to you or coming to a particular meeting room. You don't want to have a situation happen where they bump into each other, which I have had happen before a long time ago, where an interview went way longer than expected and it was quite awkward because then it's obvious who the witnesses were. So being careful about managing your calendar so that people don't bump into each other. And when to notify people, you may have restrictions on when you must notify the respondent. We have started where it's possible, not notifying the respondent until we at least have done the complainant interview, because sometimes it takes time to get to that interview, and we don't want the respondent feeling distressed and having to wait any longer than necessary. So the other advantage to that is that sometimes you have a more complete understanding of the complainant's allegations after you've met with them. They may not put everything in writing. They may not explain it well in writing. You might misinterpret what they're saying. So waiting to notify the respondent where possible can be helpful, so that you're coming to them with something that is a little closer to what they would need to respond to. And we've talked a little bit about in-person ones. We've talked about this. Okay, so let's talk about interviewing the complainant. And we tend to use the funnel technique, which is basically, tell me what you want me to know. And people will often say, well, I don't know where to start. And I will say, start wherever you like. Is it the most recent thing that happens, the first thing that happened, the thing that was most significant to you? It is important from a psychological safety standpoint, because again, it gives them agency, but it also enables them to tell the story in the way that works for them. So if you come in with 15 questions and you're going to just start firing them off at that person, they may lose their train of thought. They may forget certain things. So what I like to do is just, this is for complainants, tell me what you want me to know. I've read the complaint. I have a decent understanding of it, but I want to hear from you. This is your moment. And I will tell them, and once you're done, I may have some follow-up questions. I may need to go back and kind of tighten up my understanding of things, but I want you to tell me this in the way that matters to you. So I find that really helpful. It helps from a trauma standpoint, and it helps to make sure I actually get the information. I'm not interfering with their train of thought. And obviously what you're wanting to do is establish what the allegations are that they're making, who they're making them against, and what witnesses are present. And many of you probably already use this question. It's my favorite one. Is there anything else you think I should know? It is amazing how much more information comes with that question. And sometimes people assume that if you didn't ask about something, it means you already knew it. And so when you leave that open, is there anything we haven't discussed that you think would be helpful for me to know? You can get more information. And I do that in every interview. Witnesses, respondents, everybody. Is there anything else you think would be helpful for me to know? I had one person one time who said, well, since you asked, I have to tell you. And he was a platoon chief, I think, in a fire service. And so in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to think of all the things I might possibly need to ask him about, because he's only going to tell me if I ask, because he had decided he wasn't ratting out on somebody if he was required to answer a question, but he didn't have to volunteer information. But interestingly, even with him, when I asked that anything else you think I should know question, he still gave me more information. He also had, because this was before I was recording things, but he also had wanted me to type down, to discuss with him what his answer would be, and then I could write down his answer. And I said, I'm not doing that just to answer the question, but he really wanted to control what it was that he said. So in terms of making this go well and getting the most information, making sure that you don't interrupt unless you need to is really important. So I will only interrupt if I don't understand what they're saying, I haven't heard, or I think I've misheard, because I want them to be able to tell their story. That said, you occasionally get people that are going off on tangents and repeating themselves, and you might have to bring them back. Being present. So you're not sitting there kind of looking at your phone or daydreaming or anything like that. That's why, regardless of whether or not I am using a transcription service, which I use Transcript and Copilot to transcribe, so we do audio recording and the transcription, I still take notes. And I take notes not because I think the notes are going to be probative. I take them to keep myself on track so that I'm thinking about what they're telling me. Because if I've just got the transcript going and I'm kind of staring at it on my screen, I find I tend to daydream a little bit. And I want to make sure that I'm grounded in what they're telling me. So I find taking my own notes is also helpful. Not interrogating, so not being accusatory, but to really just, I just really want to understand what's happening, and making sure you use, plain, natural language when you're speaking to people. Not assuming is important. And this can be, if somebody uses a term, and I'll be graphic here, like they fingered me. Well, what does that mean to that person? So you're going to have to actually ask some of the questions when they're using an expression or talking about something to get them to provide more detail. Because too often we think we know what something means, especially if they're using some kind of a slang term. I did learn about Dutch ovens for the first time in an investigation. Didn't know what a Dutch oven was. Even though my husband's Dutch, I had to find out. Sometimes I have to ask my kids what certain expressions mean, but it is making sure that you're not assuming anything from what people are telling you. And don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. One of the questions that we are least likely to ask is, did you do it? We'll ask questions around it, like, were you there? Who were you speaking to? But we are not very good at saying, and did you grope them? And did you yell at them? So making sure that we ask all of the questions. We've talked about off the record, there are none, but exploring inconsistencies. So you're testing the veracity of what someone says, but you're not cross-examining them in the sense of the kinds of cross-examinations you see in a courtroom TV show. Help me understand. Over here, you said this, and then a few minutes later, you said that, and they're not really consistent with each other. Can you help me understand the difference between them or what they meant? And sometimes they can explain the inconsistencies, and sometimes the inconsistencies are reflective of a lack of credibility. So you are testing what people say, but you're doing it in a softer way. For me, one of the things I do with complainants is the very first time I interview them, I'm not generally testing the veracity of what they said. I almost always have to go back to the complainant after I've spoken to the respondent, and sometimes because of witness interviews. And then I will go back and say, well, the respondent is saying this was the conversation with you, and help me understand that perspective. Is it possible that this was the way it unfolded? So I use the second interview with the complainant as my opportunity to test the veracity of what they're saying, or the truthfulness of what they're saying. The other thing I will have them do sometimes is to demonstrate tone or body language, and ask for specific language. So you looked at the bartender video yesterday, and you can see that it's very different when you're watching what is happening than if somebody tells you about it afterwards. These events that involve personalities and perceptions and interactions don't translate well into paper. And so asking someone who says, this person yelled at me, Lauren yelled at me. Well, yelling is actually an interesting word because it means different things to different people. I have a feeling it has a lot to do with what your family was like growing up. So my family, we were loud talkers, and to some it would appear like yelling, but it was really just conversation. And my first husband would say, why are you yelling at me? I'm like, I'm not yelling, I'm just telling you about my day. Because in his world, he came from the family where you sat at the dinner table and you had the extra forks and you took the forks from the outside in and you were very polite to each other. And I grew up in a family that just yelled. And so if someone says they yelled at me, you need to understand what yelling means to them. If this door were closed, could you hear it on the other side of the door? Is it just an elevated voice or is it screaming? So getting a gauge on what that means, not assuming yelling means the same thing to them as it does to you. And that's one that I think comes up a lot to me is yelling. They yelled at me. I find a younger generation, certainly my kids' generation, their late 20s, early 30s, yelling is anybody speaking to them sternly. So making sure that you understand what yelling means is an important one. Have there been any other terms that you think mean different things to different people that you've had to get more assessment on? Okay. So now let's just want to talk specifically about interviewing the complainant. We've already talked about empathy. And empathy means neutrality, but not necessarily being stone-faced or still-faced. You still want to be human. And I want everyone that sits across from me to feel like I recognize them as a person going through something challenging and that they can open up to me and that I will listen and I will hear them. So that has to come through. But that's not the same as sympathy. It's not, I'm sorry this happened to you, but just, I'm sorry that we're meeting under these circumstances. I'm sure that this is a difficult moment for you. And then helping them. Remember, I was talking about the filing cabinets in their brain. Sometimes people struggle. So you can prompt them with things like, what stands out for you? Tell me what you remember most. What was the worst thing for you? Suhaib will be your instructor tomorrow, and he will be talking a little bit more about the impact of trauma on the brain. But one of the things that a traumatic event does for people, or does to people, and some of you may know this already, is it impacts how memories are encoded in our brain. So if an event is more neutral, we may remember it in a more chronological fashion. We may be able to remember some of the extraneous details. But if it's a traumatic event, then some of those other things fall away because our brain is just trying to process this big thing. Some of you may recall it was Brett Kavanaugh was being proposed as a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And Christine Blasey Ford said, when we were in university together, he sexually assaulted me. And she's actually now a professor and specializes in memory. And one of the things she said was, I could remember what happened. I could remember there was a friend who was making comments or laughing, couldn't tell you where I was, couldn't tell you how I got home, couldn't tell you some of the details around it. And they trashed her credibility. And that's nothing to do with credibility. That is about trauma and how memories encode in our brain. And so these questions, these prompts I've got up for you here on the screen, this is about how we get past the barrier that comes from the trauma and helps get at what matters. But a lot of the little details don't necessarily matter. Or maybe there's a detail that helps them, that anchors it. And there's one, it was, I had some training on trauma-informed interviewing, and it was a woman who was sexually assaulted, and she counted the dots in the ceiling tile as a means of disassociating from the trauma that she was experiencing. And she said there were X number of dots in that ceiling tile, and they went and counted them, and there were, because that's how she was processing it. So not immediately dismissing somebody who says, I can't remember. And you think, well, how could you not remember that? Well, I don't know, because it's a weird way our brains work. So being very mindful of that. Now, after I interview a witness or the complainant, I will always do an initial assessment. Even if this could all be substantiated, even if it were all proven to be true, would it amount to harassment or discrimination? Because when I'm doing investigations, that's what I'm investigating. And if it doesn't, then perhaps it is interpersonal conflict, or it's inappropriate behavior, but it doesn't rise to the level of harassment. Maybe the complainant is the problem. So then you have a decision to make. Should we proceed with an investigation or take an alternative approach? And I want to come back to our group now to talk about what some of those alternatives to proceeding might be. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment so we're all together again. So have you engaged in other processes rather than just doing an investigation? If you decide, look, this isn't going to amount to harassment, have you invoked other things like mediation or facilitated conversations or anything like that? What have you done?
Yes, here in Ottawa, we have the section I work in specifically is it's outside of our professional standards unit and it's integrated conflict management. So we do exactly that: facilitated conversations, mediations, group interventions, workplace assessments,
And what's
team charter
your
building. Yeah.
what's your experience been of that? Because I'm hearing many positive things out of using those processes. Has it been a net positive for you?
I would say yes. We have people who can't stand the sight of each other and walk around areas and through lots of different routes to not even have to look at the person. And then they'll leave there hugging, crying, shaking hands after getting the issue resolved. So in some cases it's just good for their peace of mind, to be able to sit in a room and talk. But it's getting them to sit down at that table that's the hardest part. Getting to agree to sit there. Yeah.
And I think in some ways it's gotten harder because we become more polarized. Like as a society, it's if you don't agree with me, it's not we'll agree to disagree. It's you're evil or you're stupid or you're completely misinformed. And so that is a challenge. I've heard that from mediators in lots of different types of organizations, universities, wherever it is where they're trying to bring people together. It can be helpful to do, solo meetings first before bringing them together to try and see how possible it is to navigate that. What about other services? Have you also tried conflict resolution approaches?
I can speak for Niagara. Just I don't know if it seems to be a bit of a trend to me. Is people get a bad performance appraisal or performance review and say that is workplace harassment because of A, B, and C, and because our problem is for context, we have it's a number system, so you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as how good or bad you are. So and you switch supervisors, right? You go to different units. So some people, the supervisors out there that say 5, 5, 5, 5, you're the greatest thing ever. But there's other supervisors who put a little bit more time into it, so then you're getting 4s or 3s or whatnot. So that seems to be, well, you're harassing me because I was getting 5s and now I'm getting 4s, which is. But to bring those people together to say this is why you got a 3 this time, that goes a long way as opposed to saying this is not harassment, move on. That goes a long way. In my opinion, is to get those people together to say this is what you need to be looking at or how we can resolve this, right? So no one's angry anymore.
Yes, 100%. And also training those in supervisory positions to not just give everybody a 5 out of 5 on everything because they don't want to have difficult conversations. That is such a common problem in all organizations where you get that supervisor like, they're great. And then somebody comes in and is like, yeah, well, you need to work on a couple of these things. And they're like, I was great. Now I'm being told I'm not. So yes, that can be a helpful one. Where I worry about mediation, because I love it and I think it should be invoked wherever possible, is if somebody's a true victim of something. So mediation implies some kind of a resolution that we're both going to do something to try and make the relationship work better. And if I've been victimized, what do I have to trade off? Like, what am I supposed to do differently? If somebody's been making racially offensive comments to me, if somebody has sexually harassed me, how am I going to sit in a room and have a conversation? If they want to have that conversation, though, then absolutely do it. And maybe it is just enabling them to feel supported and strong enough to say, when you said this, it was very offensive to me. It was very hurtful to me. And that can be a way to resolve it. But I think that can be an excellent tool. The other one that can be used is even just coaching of the respondent. Or giving somebody leadership training. So back to Linda's point about the performance reviews, that if somebody's not good at giving the hard feedback, that we want to help them to be better at that. And then sometimes there's team dynamics that are happening. So trying to do a team intervention to deal with the team challenges. I see 2 things as causing the most problems in teams. One is the leader, and it's usually not the leader that is really aggressive or authoritarian. It is the leader that doesn't deal with stuff. The hands off, why can't everybody just get along? You're all adults. That causes so many problems. And when we get into these group kind of mobbing dynamics where we already talked about confirmation bias, but the gossip happens, those are really difficult challenges. So we want to kind of intervene at the team level, because this interaction between two people, this complaint may be just a tip of an iceberg, and it's not going to solve the larger problem by investigating this, incidents between these two people. We really need to look at the larger issues. And then it may involve some reminders, which can be repeating respect in the workplace training. If you've already done it, do it again, and make sure it's really about the everyday interactions. I find too often respect training is about what I call the capital H harassment, so the big stuff, when the devil lies in the details of the not acknowledging somebody, not saying hello, eye rolling in meetings, passive aggressive behavior. All of those things are the bricks that make up a wall of civility. And when they are poorly managed, that's when it tips into harassment. So when we focus on civility, and I've paused about civility because I think I'm hearing now people are saying civility is getting a bad rap, when people are saying that's incivility. We have to keep changing our words. I like to focus on kindness. Are we being kind to each other? Are we being kind to ourselves by engaging in that behavior? Okay, I'm not pulling up my slides again because it's just faster to go through them. Are you okay if I just skip the slides for now? Because I can't see you when I'm doing this. All right, I'm not really giving you a choice because I'm just doing it anyway. So interviewing the respondents, I think what has probably come out through this is that you need to treat the respondent like they are an equal party in this. You haven't decided anything. You're here to understand their perspective. It is highly likely that a respondent will be defensive. That does not mean they have done anything wrong. It is highly likely that a respondent will try to control the process in some way. Well, I'm not meeting with you on that date. I'm not available. No, I can't do that time, because they might be feeling a loss of control. That doesn't mean they did it. You may be seeing a stress reaction. So we want to make sure that we aren't interpreting a respondent's behavior when their behavior is related to the stress of the process and not to what their behavior is. We'll talk now about selecting witnesses, and we've covered a lot of it already, so I just want to quickly go over it. The code of practice that I've mentioned already says you need to interview relevant witnesses who are employees identified by the respondent or complainant or as necessary. So the operative word there is relevant. You want to be able to confirm that that person is relevant, and they're not relevant if you've already been able to establish this event through emails or text exchanges. I don't need to speak to somebody because I know that was confirmed already, or the respondent admitted to it. Actually, here's another thing to mention. Sometimes in policing, you will interview complainant, witnesses, and then respondent. I go to the respondent first because respondents may admit to some things, which means fewer people to interview, and because then they don't feel like it's a witch hunt. You heard from me first. You aren't biasing yourself by listening to witnesses presented by the complainant. You may still need to go back to the respondent a second time. You may need to go back to the complainant a second time, but I think on balance, that creates a fairer process than going to witnesses before the respondent. Does that fit with how you are typically doing it, or are you going to witnesses before respondents? Ottawa group, what do you typically do? Do you go to respondents next or witnesses?
I think they've been doing going right to the respondents for exactly your reasons. They've kind of narrowed down the scope of the investigation. Some witnesses don't need to be interviewed after that point. So it's a little different coming in from a criminal mind frame and changing that up, but it makes sense when you're just trying to keep it from expanding where it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing the code of practice says is that you should make reasonable efforts to interview non-employees if they are relevant. We've already talked about that. So in policing, I mostly see it come up as somebody who has retired. But to John Paul's point, there may be people that have gone to another service or another organization, and you may still need to meet with them. But I do that only if absolutely necessary. And it can also be a phased approach. So I can start by, okay, I'm going to interview these two people first and see what they have to say. And then I'll decide whether I need to interview additional people, because they may say, well, I wasn't paying any attention. Yes, I was there when it allegedly happened, but I was on my phone or I was talking to somebody else. But you can do it in a little bit of a phased approach. Okay, so that's it for our morning portion. So we will break until 12:35, and then we'll come back and talk about interviewing. There was homework for you to do, which was to read the Megan and Michael case study. If you did not have a chance to do that last night, if you can just quickly read through that, that will help us because we will be working with it this afternoon. So I will see you, actually, let's do 12:40. So we'll meet you back here at 12:40. See you shortly. So now that you've had the opportunity to read the Megan and Michael a case study, that will be what we're using moving forward. And I have some video interviews from Megan and Michael, which I will share with you in a few moments. We'll be looking at different clips. It's actually going to be tough because it was a video I did 10 years ago where I got to pretend to be Megan and the interviewer, and it's hard to look at yourself, especially your 10-year younger self, but we shall do that. The video is based on a more generic case study that we used, not specific to policing, but the basic fact pattern is the same, and it's more about the interviewing techniques that we will look at. So what we're going to do right now is divide you up into pairs. So the Ottawa group just picked two of you to kind of work together. And so the Ottawa group, two of you that work together, I want you to develop the interview questions that you would like to use to ask Megan questions. And you're both going to need to jot down what those are. And then the other two do that for Michael. Then in room 2, I have John and Tammy. You're going to create questions for Megan. In room 3, I have Jean-Paul and Linda, and you will be writing questions for Michael. So I'm going to give you about 25 minutes to just jot down what questions, if you were the interviewer, you would want to have ready to interview them. As a side note, as a practice for me, is that I typically will write out my questions. I write fewer for the complainant, but I do write them out for the respondent. And then I just kind of go with how things unfold, but it helps me to make sure that I don't forget something. So being prepared ahead of time will make it go faster, but it also helps to make sure you haven't forgotten anything. So I'm just going to set the timing. So I said 25 minutes. So those of you that are doing it virtually will automatically be put into your breakout rooms. And Ottawa, you'll need to divide into 2 to do one set of questions for Megan and one set of questions for Michael. So I will start those now, and we'll see you again in 25 minutes. So it looks like we got all of the rooms back. I don't want to go over all the questions that you've designed. I don't think that that is a useful exercise of our time, but I do think it would be helpful to think about your first impressions. So you're looking at the stuff that's presented to you. What do you think you need to find out to get the answer to the question of what's going on here? I sometimes say what's really going on here, but that makes it sound like what they're telling you is not accurate. So what did you think? Those of you that were putting together questions for Megan, for example, what did you think you needed to figure out?
The first thing we would try to figure out is do a quick credibility assessment. And with obviously with corroborating evidence, the text messages are pretty damning. I think they show that there's probably some validity to her complaint. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, John. Other thoughts on what you're trying to get out of your meeting with Megan?
I think we talked too about the wellness piece, like making sure that we want to make sure that she's mentally well, even as this process goes along. So I guess I would want to see what her state of mind is, and she wrote that down in writing. So what does that look like in real person?
Mhm.
And what is it that she needs moving forward until this process is complete?
Thank you. Our two Ottawa people that focused on the Megan questions, what did you think you needed to figure out to get to the heart of what's going on?
I think for part of it for me was something's changed for her. It seems like maybe they had a budding friendship or maybe a budding relationship and something changed for her. She was suddenly not interested. And then he sort of says it's changed for him. So I kind of want to get to the root of what changed. Was she showing some interest initially and then didn't, and kind of what happened in between there? That would be a focal area. And Mel, do you have more?
Yeah, just to go along with that, like what it was like in the beginning when she first joined the platoon and he was her supervisor, like to get a grasp on like Brenda said, their relationship, how it started out. Because it seems to just go right into the harassment, but how did it start? Like were they friends? Were they hanging out? Were they close? Was he more like a mentor? Kind of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And
I think the transition of that relationship would be very helpful. Sorry, Mel, I think I cut you off.
no, I was just going to add too, and we certainly do see that often if there's some kind of a performance review. I mean, it's like, okay, all of a sudden there's a complaint about it. So I want to know, like, legitimately, is there a performance issue, or legitimately, um, the timings of all that. I want to get some info about. Has anyone spoken to you before? Does anyone else believe there's like, I really want to uncover that a bit.
And you probably want to find out why now, not as a way of challenging her credibility, but what led to you filing the complaint at this point? So it's been going on, looks like for a little while. What was the triggering event for you where you said you wanted to file a complaint? I think sometimes there is this assumption that if somebody's received bad performance feedback, that if they're filing a complaint, it's a weapon. But it's often not until people are experiencing some kind of other consequences that they will come forward, or maybe somebody else is experiencing it. Years ago, I did an investigation where the complainant was experiencing problems from her supervisor, and he was sending flirtatious things and suggestive messages, and she told him to stop, and he largely did, but it was still kind of awkward and uncomfortable. And then performance review time, she got a very bad performance review, and she'd been there for many years and had never had a bad performance review, including from him. And then in the middle of the review, he said, and this has nothing to do with what happened with us previously. So all of a sudden the red flags go up. It's like, okay, well, he thinks that us protest too much. And so that's when she filed the complaint. And the employer's initial reaction was, well, that's just, her trying to get away from this complaint. So I said to her, like, what caused you to bring it now? And she said, well, he did kind of stop, but it got really awkward. And I was fine with it. I was wondering about this performance review because it was something I hadn't experienced before. But then when he made that comment, I'm like, he's trying to get me fired. And she's not wrong. He had already submitted the paperwork to have her terminated. So this was his first step towards that termination. So asking the why now in a way that doesn't sound like why now, but finding out what the triggering event was can be important. And the evolution of the relationship is important. I think sometimes people won't tell you that they did flirt with the person or they did have a relationship or did have a date because they think then you won't believe them. So providing them with some permission, which is sometimes things evolve. We may start out flirting with somebody or being interested in somebody, and then it just doesn't work out. So, feel free to share those things with me too. That doesn't mean that your complaint doesn't have validity or credibility. So kind of giving people permission to have engaged in behavior themselves is very helpful because it isn't an automatic invalidation of their complaint if they had been previously flirting. Maybe they were happy with it. Maybe they liked it. And then suddenly they didn't anymore. When they change their mind, it is a little harder to say a reasonable person knew or ought to have known that it was unwelcome. So what you'd want to know is when that changed for you, how did you communicate that to him? And communicating that to him doesn't necessarily even mean saying, this is not welcome. It can mean, did you stop engaging? Did you stop going to the gym with him? Did you avoid going when you knew he was going to be there? So those are all messages that are being sent where we could say a reasonable person ought to have known that it was unwelcome. But unless there's some shift, it might be harder to make that finding that the reasonable person, in this case, Michael, would have known that it was no longer welcome to her. So you want to kind of analyze those pieces as well. And John, back to your comment about credibility, we're always trying to get a sense as to whether someone's credible. A true credibility assessment obviously comes at the end when we have all of the evidence. Is there anything been corroborated by witnesses or by documents? But you are trying to get a tentative view on, is their evidence consistent? Do they seem to be evasive? Those sorts of things that you're looking for in terms of credibility. I'm pausing because Sueb's going to do a more detailed credibility discussion with you tomorrow, but you are trying to get a sense as to whether they're telling you the truth as they know it. Anything else on the Megan questions that you thought would be helpful for you to really understand this dynamic?
One of the other things we talked about is I have a female staff surgeon in my office. I would probably get her to do the interview just because of the sensitivity of it. I would more than likely, I think it would go without saying, she'd probably be more comfortable with a female officer.
So that's good. So you're thinking about the sensitivities of this particular situation and what would make it easier for the person to speak up. And that's really our goal, to make it easier for somebody to share their story, warts and all, right?
Yeah.
The things they've done, the things that they're not proud of, all of that. Thank you. Anything else for the Megan side, including any documents you might want to look at?
Well, I would have asked if she has any copies of her past performance reviews, but I'm also, if this was going on for a period of time, is there any more text messages? Because she's provided 5 days. So is there anything more to this?
Yes, absolutely. So you'd want to feel out anything else. In terms of the performance reviews, I would ask her if she has other ones. If she says, this is the first time I've gotten a bad review, do you have others that you mind sharing with me? I can also access them if need be. And sometimes I wait on those pieces until I've heard from the respondent, because Michael may say, yeah, she was a good performer, and then she wasn't anymore. And so that's why it changed. So those earlier ones aren't going to tell you anything because he's acknowledged that he was giving her good reviews. Okay, so let's switch to the Michael side. So those of you that were doing Michael. So I think Linda and Jean-Paul, you were doing Michael. What sort of things did you feel you wanted to get from him?
Well, pretty simple. We have some documented evidence. We have a lot of witnesses. Yeah, he's got a pretty defensive statement. I just let him talk. He's going to have to answer those questions. What I found, near the end, of course, the text messages we went through, and these are some of the. There's an awful lot of information for us to kind of ask, question, and contest his, bring light to what he provided as a statement to what really occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, quite frankly, I think Michael dug himself a hole with his statement.
In what
So,
way?
but wow, he's very dismissive. He's trying to put the blame on her, and whether there was an assault or not, technically he had assaulted her first,
Mm-hmm.
and in the and made her feel quite awkward amongst her peers too. So in three different cases. So once we, in a line of questioning, it would be pretty simple for me to, or any investigator to ask some pretty broad questions about those. I think he had 3 different public comments that were pretty rude and suggestive. And I think Michael will come around once he has to answer a few of those. Oh, sorry, I had my camera off.
No, that's okay. We shall see what
So-
Michael does when we watch the videos. One of the
Sorry
things
about that.
I find that we need to be mindful of when it comes to things like text messages is when they're all put together on one document, it looks much different than it would if we're having this exchange and then 2 weeks later we're having a different exchange. And so you're not really thinking about what Megan said previously. So when we're examining that type of evidence, we have to also be conscious that this is actually separated by a bit of time. One of the tools I use very often and I find incredibly helpful is a chronology. I'll just map out what happened and when, because it really helps me to see a pattern. If there were all these text messages in a 24-hour period, I think that might feel more aggressive than if this happened over the space of 8 months. So looking at how things unfolded can be helpful. And then layering that with other things that were going on at the same time might show how that evolved. Linda,
Even in those text messages, Linda and I discussed that she was quick at responding within the first, when it didn't really have much substance. And then as soon as he started making, "Hey, cutie," the time started expanding. Like she
Yeah.
knew she had to respond, but she's probably venting in her car or punching the steering wheel and saying, "This guy's such a creep." I get it. We can believe that. You could feel it when you read it and see the timelines. So
excellent. Linda, anything that you would like to add in terms of interviewing Michael?
Yeah, we discussed the timing of the performance review or email or whatever that was, because it was hard to decipher. I know there was some dates, but was it after the other date, so to say? I'm doing my air quotes, when they went out. And also, did she actually ask him to stop speaking with her or stop talking to her the way he did? Because that, to me, if he heard that and she did say that, then that's quite compelling as well to her.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, our Ottawa Michael people, what did you feel you needed to get from him?
Yeah. So, oh, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Perfect. So we have a whole bunch of questions that we would have asked in terms of try and get a history of, when did he came into contact with her, whether or not he knew her prior to supervising her. Have him go into a little bit more details in terms of him describing the relationship or what his interpretation of their relationship was or is. We'd want to hear a little bit more about the gym dynamics. Are there any witnesses to the gym incidents that is being spoken about? Also, have him explain some of the things, like he would say, she's grabbing me, like kind of walk me through what that looks like, and in those moments, what the circumstances are around those moments for her to be doing that. Who knows? Maybe she felt comfortable at the time. He obviously felt comfortable at the time, but kind of walk us through that. So we would ask him a lot in terms of a lot of open-ended questions, like, tell me a little bit more about that. Can you describe, whatever it is that we're talking about, so as to get his interpretation of what that looks like. We know what hers feels and look like, but to kind of see if they're in sync, or, okay, these are some of the actions that he should have known that isn't. She's not necessarily going for some of the behaviors that he was, try to instill upon her, if that makes sense. And, he talked about him not being interested in her romantically, again. So that was one of the things that he had mentioned. But it's like, what made you make that decision, right? Did something change?
Mhm.
So we would ask a lot of open-ended questions as it pertains to maybe some of the things that he would have mentioned during the interview.
It is fascinating to me how many times in a sexual harassment investigation I've heard I'm married and she's not my type.
Yes.
Like that's a guarantee that you didn't do the bad stuff. Well, she's not my type. I think the other thing that you probably need, regardless of whether it's Megan or Michael, one of the elements of the test of harassment is in a workplace. And so you're going to have to get enough about how they come to be at the gym. For example, is it something that is, this sounds like it's an off-site gym, which would be different than if it's a gym that is located within the service. So if it's in your building, you're going to be better able to say that's the workplace. Are they going collectively with a few people from work straight to the gym? More likely to make it the workplace. If they just happen to run into each other there, might not be the workplace. So I think you're going to need to find out more about how they end up together at the gym. Did they both decide to get gym memberships together? Because at the time they were getting along really well, but she doesn't want you to know that. So initially that's not coming out because she's embarrassed about that. She thinks you're not going to believe her. So you have to figure out, how do you end up seeing each other at the gym? Is he finding out when she's going to be there and he's making sure he's there too? So I think that's going to be an element for making a decision about whether this actually meets the legal definition of harassment, because workplace is a component of that. So you've got to look at, was it unwelcome? She's telling us it was unwelcome. Did he know it was unwelcome? He says he doesn't. Would a reasonable person have known it was unwelcome? So what did she do that he should have figured it out by, and did it occur in the workplace? So you've got to look at each of those elements and figure out, what questions do I need to ask to be able to ascertain that part of it. Did anything else come up for you that you feel you would need to ask about in order to get through the complainant respondent stage and assess what happens next? Is there anyone that jumps out at you just from a first blush that you think you would need to speak to as a witness?
Prior victim. The alleged prior victim.
So
Is it Hannah?
Them?
No. There's a civilian also, right?
Yeah, there's reference to this isn't the first time that he had done something to somebody else. So at what point would you meet with that person, and how would it help you in deciding whether that happened here?
I would speak to, I'd want to speak to Robert Easton for that, given he was at the gym. He's a eye-on witness, or the either way, touching from either side, and he can kind of give a dynamic of what's happening there. Yeah, I'd start with him probably as a witness.
Anyone else that might be a witness?
I was trying to figure out, she had those three names, one being in the elevator, but what were the other two? Like, I guess when we spoke with her, I'd have to figure out what can they contribute to the investigation, and then.
Yes. So when someone says, I think you should meet with so-and-so, what information do you think they have that would be helpful? So I always ask why they're putting someone forward. And I always tell people I may not interview absolutely everybody. I try to limit it to only those that I need. But I would love to hear from you in terms of your perspective. With respect to prior events, I only go to those if I can't make a decision about this one based on the evidence I have. And I only go there after I've done that. So what that is similar fact evidence. In other words, this is something that has happened before. And if it is really similar, somebody makes a comment and they've made the exact same comment to somebody else in a similar circumstance, that may make it more likely that it happened again. But if it's just, he made a comment to one person and then groped another person or rolled his eyes at another person, those aren't necessarily similar enough to show that it's more likely than not that it happened here. And the other thing you want to do is make sure you aren't biasing yourself. So I park those previous incidents until the end. If I'm able to make a decision without looking at whether it happened before, I don't bother with what happened before. What happened before might be relevant when it comes to discipline or how to to manage it if it's a repeat offender. But in terms of me making my decision, I may not need that evidence. And then if I don't have everything that I need, then I may figure out how it applies, how similar is it, how recent was it, before again deciding whether or not to go to that evidence. So it can be relevant, it can be probative, but when you do it and when it is most helpful would be something you would need to analyze as well. Okay, any other thoughts on getting ready to interview? Because we're going to do a role play, but not just yet. Okay, so your homework was to watch the intro videos. Did everybody watch those intro videos? Did you have any thoughts on whether you thought they were effective or how that was approached that you might do differently, or you thought was actually a way that you might use for yourself? Any thoughts on that?
I thought the interview of Megan was a little bit off-putting at points, so I'm hoping the point of it was to teach us some of those points, because I think he used he's very his tone was a bit like impatient and get to the answer and interrupting, and sort of the classic 101 of what maybe not to do. So I'm hoping that was the purpose of that, and not that's like,
yes.
Do you know what I mean? So I was hoping that was to sort of demonstrate that.
It's not a how-to video. It's really
Right.
just identifying what approaches work and what ones don't. I
Right.
think the Michael interviewer came across a bit like a litigation lawyer,
Yes.
like trying
That's
to
exactly right.
cross-examine as opposed to trying to understand. So the piece you were required to watch was just the intro, and those intros are, fairly standard, helping them to understand the process. I actually have a little checklist that I've written because although I've said the same things over and over again, I'll invariably forget something. And then it just makes sure I've covered them, and then I just check them off as I go. But what am I saying about confidentiality, about me being impartial, about what happens if they think of other things afterwards? All of those set things can be very helpful if they're laid out in a bit of a checklist for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to try and show you some snippets of the interview and hope for the best in terms of sharing my screen. So I'm going to 12. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sorry, I have to, I think, share this a different way. 1 second. Okay, so I think I have to share the LMS and then expand the screen to the full screen. So just bear with me. So what do you see there? Okay, I think I'm using my laptop to see what you see. Okay, and then hit play. Okay, so we're just going to watch a couple of minutes of this. So I want you to be even jot down a couple of things, but things that you thought were done well or maybe done poorly, you wouldn't do it that way. So this is really a critique of how this particular set of interview questions went. Sure.
Okay. So Megan, give me a few seconds to just review these text messages.
Okay.
Okay, I'm looking at them. The date of these text messages seem to occur in February. And it seems to be, would this be before or after that time you went out for drinks?
I think it was just like right after,
Okay.
within a day or two after we went out.
Okay.
I think we went out on like the Friday night or the Saturday night. I think it was Friday night, and then this was the following Monday.
And are you telling me that these text messages were getting a little forward? Can you explain to me how?
Well, in the beginning, I thought everything was okay, and they were just kind of fun. And you can see I respond to him, but then he starts to get creepy. So if you look, like he says stuff like we should be waking up together, and I've been thinking about you all morning, and I just kind of, deflect. And I mean, clearly I'm not interested. Like if you look at these text messages, it's pretty clear that I'm not interested, but he keeps going. Then he asks me if I want to have a quickie in the janitor's closet. I don't even know where that came from. So I just kind of ignored it. And then he keeps going. Like on Thursday, he says, we can see it there at 8 o'clock in the morning. I woke up hard thinking about you. Do I make you wet? Well, what do I do with that? This guy's my boss. It was so uncomfortable.
Well, is it possible, Megan, when I'm looking at these text messages, Michael may say that it looks like you are also playing along with these messages and responding and seem to be equally flirting back with him. I mean, that's what I'm assuming he will say, and I'll bring your attention to Wednesday morning, where you actually send a text to him at 7 a.m. saying, rise and shine. Is it, is it you that basically is initiating the contact with Michael on that day?
This is what happens when women bring things forward. It always becomes you were asking for it. All I said was rise and shine. Like things were friendly. This is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The things were still kind of friendly. It's after that he starts getting creepy. But like, you can't seriously suggest that this is my fault. I didn't do anything. I was just
Megan, I'm
friendly.
not trying to say that, Megan. Just so you understand, I'm trying to anticipate what Michael is going to say in response to these issues.
Okay.
So in order for me to dot my I's and cross my T's, so to speak, I want to make sure that I cover all my bases. And it's very clear from these text messages that yes, Michael is saying some things that optically to a neutral person seem to be a little graphic, but at the same time, Michael will say that you were playing along and you're flirting back.
Okay,
Well,
well,
that's what
I
he said.
don't think I was playing along. That's all I have to say. I just,
Did you tell him
the
that? Did you tell
messages
him-
speak for themselves.
Well, if you can help me understand, did you in these messages at any point tell him that this is, you want to end this conversation? Did you stop texting him? Did you?
Well, I wasn't responding. And then he'd send another text if I ignored him. And then at one point he calls me Ms. Silent. Well, that's because I wasn't saying anything, but he's also sending these things while we're working. I'm just like, these are our work phones. This is not our personal devices. And he's doing all this stuff at work and I'm trying to get my work done. You can see, I say one of them, like, so busy, talk to you later. I'm really trying to deflect it. But did I come right out and say, stop doing this? No, I don't know why I didn't. I guess, in hindsight, I probably should have, but I thought it was pretty clear from the way I acted that I wasn't interested.
Okay. It's clear that these text messages occurred in.
I have to find you again. Sorry, my screen disappeared. Okay, so let's critique that section. Brenda had already given some of her thoughts, but what did you think about the approach to how he was asking Megan the questions?
I think suggesting that she was being equally flirtatious, he's kind of victim blaming here. I don't know. I don't think it was the right approach to say that she was playing along. Like she's able to qualify why she responded to him the way that she did a couple times, and then she feels that her not responding to any of the communications is making it pretty obvious that she doesn't want any part in it.
Yes. Now, one of the techniques he seemed to be trying to use was to say, well, I'm basically just telling you what Michael's apt to say, so I'm just getting out in front of it. Do you think that's a good approach? I mean, maybe saying it more gently than he did, but is it a good thing to say, well, I'm assuming Michael's going to say this, so I'm going to ask you about that now? Do you think that's a good approach or the best timing for that approach?
I think he probably could have listened a little bit more to what she was saying, and instead of trying to cut her off or just immediately jump into what Michael is going to say, because although it's a good question to ask, or at least to go around in terms of what she thought the other person might say based on the text messages, it's the way he's asking. It's as though he's already taking sides, trying to make excuses for Michael rather than thinking, okay, I need to, be a little bit more open and listen more and have an understanding in terms of where she's coming from based on those messages. I didn't like that interview one bit.
Did it feel trauma informed?
He's definitely biased, accusatory, lacks empathy. He's a Michael 2.0.
Well, he just played Michael. Maybe he got confused.
Oh, there you go. But he's opinionated, right? So he's drawn his own opinion out of his own, that's the way I felt about it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not the right person to interview.
You know what it reminded me of is that bar video we watched where the
Mm.
bartender blames the woman there. Like, this is what the bar, guests are going to be like. This is what, and he sort of had that same sort of, I don't know, callous, like, I don't know, just not caring all that much. And again, the blaming bit, but it's very similar.
Yeah, it's a bit of gaslighting in a way too. So for me, the way I would approach it, first of all, I wouldn't ask questions in that way, but I would wait until I know what Michael's saying, not trying to get out in front of what Michael says, because then I can say, well, Michael says that the two of you were friends before. And so I want to understand your perspective on that. Do you agree with him? Did you see it a different way? That sort of thing, as opposed to trying to get out in front of it by asking her those challenging questions up front. And that was where I was talking before about I like to save the cross-examination, which I think of it more as testing the veracity. I like to save that for the second interview with the complainant because somebody's going to shut down. If that's how you're starting this interview, because that's pretty early on in the interview, if that's how you're starting it, they're going to be like, I don't know why I'm telling you anything because you're not listening to me at all. So I think that is a risk to that. Any other risks you see with a line of questioning like what the Megan investigator is using? So the personal shutdown, what else is a risk? I think Jean-Paul, you already used the word, but an accusation that the investigator is biased, that he has his mind made up. It doesn't come across as a neutral investigation. It comes across as, I'm just trying to prove something. Okay, so now we're going to watch the reverse, where I just have to look at the timeline. So we're going to look at a section where Michael is being interviewed. I just have to get to the right spot. They asked, have you ever made that comment?
She's using this machine that works your, I think, the glutes, you use your legs and you bring it. That's what she does. She uses that. She's always like, I'm going to use this machine. I'm always like joking with her. You don't need to use that machine. You're fine. Your back is fine. You could work on something else. Like, it's a joke. She looks great there. So why did I say tight ass? I don't think I can use the words tight ass, but we're there. We're making jokes about the equipment. It's all in the context of the workouts we're doing. That's what it's about.
So you said she looks great there. What did you mean by that?
Well, she looks good. Her outfit looks good. It makes her look good. She looks nice. She's an attractive, don't take me wrong. She's an attractive woman. Like, we're friends working out at the gym. She knows she looks good. She points out to me where I look good, where I look bad. We do the same thing. It's a workout after work where two of us are going and work it out with other people. We're not planning this. We're just there.
Okay.
I don't know what this has to do with this allegation. Why am I even answering those questions? Like, I don't get it.
Fair enough. But you're answering the questions because these are the things that she's alleged. Remember, I'm saying it doesn't necessarily mean I've made a finding on anything. And one of the things that I will have to assess in all of this is what role does it play that you're outside of the workplace when these things are happening, when you're at the gym, right? Because you've mentioned several times now, this isn't at work, this is happening outside of work at the gym. So that will be a question that I have to ask.
What if I don't answer? What if I don't answer that question?
I'm not saying it's a question I have to ask you. I'm saying it's a question I have to ask in doing the report.
But what if I don't answer your question?
Oh, well, you don't have to answer my questions. It's up to you what you do. It's an entirely voluntary process. The challenge for you, though, is if you don't answer the questions, then I am forced to make decisions based on the information that I do have. So it's in your best
give you
interest.
my side of the story, you're just gonna say that's
Yes,
it?
no, I won't say that's it. I will continue the investigation. I might meet with witnesses or look at other documents. I would do as complete an investigation as I otherwise would, but it would be without the benefit of your information.
I have nothing to hide. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So just to confirm, are you saying you did not use the term tight ass?
I don't remember using the word I don't use words like that. I don't remember talking to people like that.
Did you ever?
You can ask Robert, you can ask Hannah, you can ask them, they'll tell you, do I use words like that? No.
Okay. Did you ever have any kind of a personal relation? Okay, what are your thoughts on how that was navigated? Were there things that you liked about that, things that you would do differently in terms of how he was questioned and the responses to his inquiries? And I can take it because you're not criticizing me. It's a role I was playing.
I felt like he was just trying to talk over you and deflect. Like, why am I here? Why am I even here? I don't understand. He didn't understand. Didn't look like he understood that the gym's probably an extension of the workplace. Asking questions like, what happens if I don't answer the questions? Well, and then providing a couple names of people that said he would never say that. And then he decides to answer the questions afterwards. It just seemed like he was just trying to deflect and not really get down to the root of what you were asking him.
Do you think that's an effective way of responding to somebody who's pushing back like that?
I mean, you took the time to explain to him that, yeah, you don't have to answer these questions, but without your full account, you're not going to be able to give him an opportunity to answer to any of this. And I think that was the right thing to do.
And that does come up, I find from time to time. Well, what happens if I don't participate and don't tell you anything? And why do I have to answer? And it's not going to help me to answer. And so I think helping people understand why it's in their best interest to participate and to fill you in can be helpful, but it doesn't prevent you from continuing an investigation. And that's what I think they need to understand. Listening to him, what are your initial thoughts on his credibility?
Yeah, we didn't think he came across very credible. His answers were not fulsome. They were just you're looking at the body language too, and he thought this was silly and fluffy, kind of. That's the way he came across. He wasn't, he was focused more on his questions that he wanted to ask than the answers he wanted to give. And so, anything else?
Do you think horn effect bias could happen where he's not particularly likable, so then you just stop liking any of his answers? Because he's not terribly likable. He comes across as a bit of an ass, quite frankly. So I think that's a risk too.
I would say yes. That's a risk to self-check. Yes.
Yeah, I can't stand you.
Mhm.
And I find it happens often with respondents too that are like, because they want to manage the process and no, I'm not available then, and I don't have to do this, and you can't make me do that. And sometimes all they're doing is proving the thing that is alleged about them, like that's how they act. But then sometimes I have to think they're getting defensive because it's a stressful process, and I have to be careful not to lock into they are unlikable and therefore I'm not interested in anything they have to say. So we're going to continue on a little bit more with that interview. We're going to talk about the date. So he shares about the date. Relationship with Megan?
We went out for drinks one time. That was it. I mean, we went out. I invited her out to go for some drinks after work. I mean, just for beers, catch a game. That's all it was. I mean, to be honest, she's not my type. I'm not into this person. I just thought it would be a fun thing to do. She's friendly. We hang out at the gym. We talk at work. I thought, let's go for drinks.
So was it a date that you went on?
Not a date. It was more just a question of, I mean, she seems flirtatious with me. Seems to be interested in listening to me and talking to me. And I just thought, you know what, maybe this could lead to something. Who knows? But then I realized she's not my type. She's not my type. I would not. We went on one date, not really a date. We went out, had some drinks, and I realized she's not for me. That was around the same time we go to the gym, maybe just a bit after.
So help me understand, because what I'm hearing is slightly inconsistent. So you're saying it's a date, and then you're saying, well, it's not really a date, and I thought maybe it could lead to something, but she's not my type. So what I'm trying to understand is the context at that moment when you invited her out. Were you inviting her out because there was an interest in a relationship with her?
I thought she was interested in me. She was flirtatious with me. She would talk to me at the gym. She seemed to be interested in me. And I thought, okay, I'm single. She's single. I thought, why not? Why not see if this would lead to something? So I asked her, I mean, there's no policy against dating in the company. I'm allowed to go on a date with someone if they like me. She liked me. And listen, nothing happened anyways. Went out. It was like a date. I guess it was a date, but nothing happened. She's not my type. I have no interest in this person.
Okay. Coming back to the policy, there is a policy about interpersonal relationships or personal relationships being a conflict. And you were in a reporting relationship, correct?
Listen, Megan and I did the same role. We were both CSRs. I was CSR just like everybody else. And then I got promoted. I don't know if she applied for the same position. Maybe she just pissed off she didn't get it, but I applied. I got the role. So now, yes, I manage the CSRs. But I used to be one of them. I used to hang out with them. And yes, but you know, the other thing too, this is not a relationship. We didn't have a relationship. I'm dating somebody else now. We went out. Yes, could it have turned into one? Maybe then we would have violated the policy if there is a policy, as you say, but we didn't go on any more dates. We didn't have a relationship. Nothing stemmed from that one night. But is it wrong to go for a drink with somebody at work? Is that a problem?
Do you know when you went on that date? Okay, so the same basic questions. First of all, did you have any different views on his credibility? Now, if we're thinking about, got to be mindful of the horn effect, that we're not just going to go, I can't stand that guy. Did he say anything that you thought, well, maybe I need to follow up on it more? Or did you feel it was more of the not credible part? What were your thoughts on that?
I kind of got stuck on the part where she's attracted to me. It's all she wants me, and there was he wouldn't even admit to any reciprocal behavior in regards to that aspect of things, which is kind of odd. But again, it would be something to follow up with Constable Davidson at another time. If that's the case, this is what he said. You were always attracted to him. But I think even in her statement, she said at some point there was some sort of interest, but then it faded off. So again, leads to more her credibility than his, my aspect of things.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Other thoughts on that particular segment? He was a bit inconsistent. It's a date. It's not a date. Well, it might have been a date. I wasn't interested. Well, maybe it could have turned into something. So there was a little bit of a, coming back to that and help me understand type thing. Would you have done more than that? Did you think that was the right way to approach it? Would you have done it differently? Because he is a bit inconsistent.
I think it's important to establish that and do what you can to establish the fact that was it a date or was it not a date? Like if you're just going out for drinks with coworkers, that's something very different. But you're either gonna know it or you're not. It's gonna be a yes or no. So again, it goes against his credibility that he just can't answer. Yeah, we went on a date. It didn't work out because of this, and this, and we moved on as friends. But he couldn't even hammer that down. So again, maybe it's the horn effect. I don't know, but he seems like he's full of it. So
if you were writing a credibility assessment, what would you point out to as harming or impairing his credibility?
His lack of commitment in regards to his answers. He can't commit to simple answers. You're not asking anything complicated at that point. It's not trickery. It's very simplistic answers that he cannot give, and he farts around the whole entire conversation and just unable to commit. So
yes,
I think he starts blaming her too for possibly not getting the job. He's giving some possibilities out there as to why she's upset.
And maybe that's true. I think that would be something you'd want to follow up with on her, which goes back to the why now type of questioning. So what led you to bring it at this point? Because obviously this is going on and you say it was bothering you all this time. What led to it happening now? And maybe there is some truth truth to that. It may not be 100% of it, but maybe there is some truth to that. So I think it is worth at least following up on it. I would describe him as evasive. I like your description of him not committing. That would be a word that you often see in credibility assessments when the courts and tribunals do them. They talk about evasiveness, and it's like you can't pin him down. And sometimes you want to say, is that yes or a no? Or like, is it a date or not a date? But it's certainly something to point to because he would not answer that particular question. So that would not help him in terms of his answers. And I'm often surprised by people because I think sometimes it's just better to say, yep, went on a date. I was interested in her and it didn't go anywhere. Or for her to say it for that matter. But that's why I think we have to give people permission to, we call it statements against interest, because that makes you more credible. If you admit that you did something that wasn't great, that actually makes you more credible. It's not that we're trying to coach people when we're investigating them, but it is something to look for. She admits that she was flirting with him. That makes her more credible when she says, and then it wasn't fun anymore. So looking for those things that kind of show that they are not just being dismissive or deflecting what happened, but they're actually owning some pieces to it.
I would also add, when he's saying she's not my type and I now have a new girlfriend, it's like, did you have a girlfriend before? Like it's as though it's, minimizing his role to a certain degree. It's like, meh, it's, she wouldn't be someone I'm interested in. It's like, who comes up with those kind of, statements when
there's a certain U.S. president that uses that. Not my type.
Right?
Yeah.
It certainly goes towards his credibility for sure, and in terms of what is true, ultimate.
Yeah, because he's not saying I didn't. He's saying I wouldn't. And that's another thing to watch for when people say I would never, or why would I do something like that? That's not an answer to the question. It's often a little bit of a flag because they're ducking and weaving around the question. And most people don't want to lie. So they will avoid lying by shading the truth or skirting around what you've said. And I would never do something like that. Or why would I ever do that? What reason would I have to flirt with her? She's not my type. So coming back to saying, that's not my question. My question is about whether or not she's your type. Did you, in fact, make that comment to her? So kind of pinning them down a little bit in a respectful way, but kind of pinning them down. Anything else that came up? Because we're going to look at a couple more video clips in a little bit, but was there anything else that jumped out at you from those ones? Okay, so now we're doing the role play. So if you were preparing questions for, I'm going to do the Ottawa group first, because I remember how I did the other two breakout groups. So the Ottawa people, now you're splitting up. If you prepared questions for Megan, you are playing the role of Michael, and vice versa. For the four of you that were in the breakout rooms, I'm going to alternate you. So you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions and answer questions. If you go back into our LMS system, there's a character sheet. There's a character sheet for Megan and a character sheet for Michael. So if you wrote questions for Michael, that means you are acting like Megan. You've got to look at that character sheet. It gives you the background and how you are supposed to respond to the questions, some of the backstory. So I'm going to get breakout rooms set up while you take a look at your character sheet. So pull up your character sheet. And so Linda, I'm going to connect you with John, and Jean-Paul, you are going to be with Tammy. Okay, so I'm going to redo those breakout rooms, but you have a moment right now to spend about 5 minutes prepping for your role being interviewed. We've already prepared the questions. Now it's just to prep to be interviewed. Have you been able to find their character? Okay, so I'm going to put you into these roles, and you're going to act like the Megan or the Michael in answering the questions based on that character sheet. So I've set this for 20 minutes. You don't necessarily need to start with the intro piece. You can if you want to practice that, but you can also just go to the heart of some of the questions that you would want to ask them. And so we're doing the Megan interviews first. For the Megans in the crowd, don't be easy on your interviewer. So we'll do the same with Michael. We want to challenge ourselves for those interviews that are a little bit trickier. So throw up roadblocks if you think it's helpful. Okay, so I'm opening those rooms now.
Lauren, I'm
Yeah.
gonna interrogate you first. Are those breakout rooms recorded, and do you monitor them?
They're not recorded and we do not monitor them.
All right, we did fabulous, by the way.
You're the all-stars. Well, since you started out cheeky, we're going to start out with you. Were you the interviewer or were you Megan? Oh, you're on mute.
This was Linda's presentation.
All right, Linda, it's over to you. And we lost your video again, John Paul. I think when you went to click the sound on, you turned the video. There you go. We see you again.
I
Okay.
was Megan and then interrogated by JP.
So tell me about what he did well.
He definitely came from the trauma informed, like all about wellness and take your time and do I need a support person, et cetera, et cetera. Like came from that angle of a good place, not a interrogation place.
And how
Lauren,
did
what we discussed was making sure that she felt comfortable. The reprisal thing, the whole process of coming forward is tough. So that was some of the biggest reassurances I wanted to give her.
And that's a great way to start it off. Linda, how did it feel to you? Like, did it make you feel better able to participate?
It did for sure, because it didn't feel like it was accusatory, so to say. Like I felt listened to. I didn't feel like it was, why are you here? This is nonsense, that type of a thing.
Sounds like he was a little bit of the opposite of the video interviewer. And did Linda do anything that made your life harder, JP?
No, she was pretty good. Like it was, other than the emotions, because it's you have to act, you're acting like, it's an emotional state. It's just tough to, as an interviewer, you're always reading the subject, whoever, whether it's a respondent or a witness, you want to give the appropriate time and pick up on the individual, so to speak. So you definitely want to. I come from a lot of experience in the North. So we had a discussion too. Linda and I discussed a lot of factors. We'll say that because I said we also have to take in interviewing complainants or victims, whatever. You really have to understand their backgrounds. We talk about trauma informed and stuff like that, but when I deal with the people in the North, and I have for a good portion of my career. You have to take into consideration how they explain stuff and how they provide you that information. Because one word I know in my language, Cree, one word or one small sentence can mean a paragraph or half a page of story that we would get from typically other people, right? So, you just have to learn how to. I guess gather the information that's acceptable for an investigation. So sometimes it's a lot of probing. Sometimes in certain individuals, not necessarily leading them, but you're continuously carrying them towards the next bit of information you require. So.
Well, that's great because you call to mind the idea that we need some cultural sensitivity and awareness to know that different people will respond to questioning in different ways. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem. It just is a different approach. So thank you. And we had John and Tammy. So who was the interviewer and who was Megan?
John interviewed me.
Okay. So what did he do that you felt was effective as an interviewer?
His intro was very calming. He worked through that. So his intro was very calming. He'd also explained, why he was there, why I was there, and afforded me all the opportunities offsite with somebody if I needed support. And actually just followed basically your funnel and just tell me what you need to tell me. Like, what is it that you need me to know? And then ask for a timeline. He goes, I'm trying to wrap my head around everything. Can we just kind of walk me through the timeline? Instead of instead of throwing questions at me, we were able to walk through it with respect to, was he my sergeant always for 3 years? Was he my sergeant when we went for a date? Like, how did all those things play out and why now? Instead of asking me, why did you complain now? That just came out more fluid, allowing me to go through a timeline.
That makes sense. You're kind of building to the then why now as opposed to starting with that because it gives you that chance to give the background and context. So that sounds great. John, did Tammy give you any pushback or any challenges as the investigator that you felt you had to navigate?
One of the things they talked about was the question for why now. We talked about is, I think that question would have to be posed near the end. And I think you'd have to be extremely careful how you pose that question because you wouldn't want it to appear accusatory, especially if you're taking that approach. I mean, I came from a drug background, so my whole world for the better part of a decade was confidential informants, and one of the first things that you do is try to get those people to like you. But even prior to the interview, for the interview prep, try and learn as much about your subject and who you're going to be interviewing. And one of the things that I emphasized to her was, I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I want to be. And one of the things, I understand how hard it's going to be for you to come forward with this, and you know, in order to change the culture that we live in today, I can appreciate the fact that you're willing to step up to do this. And then once I kind of laid all that out for her at the beginning, then everything went smoothly.
I like that you were commending her for coming forward and acknowledging how hard that is to do, and that unless people come forward, it's hard for things to change, because I think that then helps tap into the courage, because quite often bringing forward complaints requires courage. So
Yeah.
you're speaking to that.
Yeah, and just interviewing as a whole, I mean, she doesn't know me, I don't know her. We know very little about each other, but it's a good way to try to establish that trust at the very beginning and lay it all out there and be transparent at the beginning of it about what direction you're going and be genuine.
Being genuine is very important. Thank you for sharing that, John. Okay, our Ottawa duos.
I
So
was Megan, and Brenda was interviewing me.
Okay.
So
Thoughts
obviously,
on Brenda's interview?
very experienced, and that came off right away. Very down to earth, kept everything good tone. I'd like to commend her for eliciting a lot of information, open-ended questions, make me feel very comfortable that I was in a safe spot, that I was here, and then she had a genuine interest in my responses, which made me talk and provide more information at that point. So
it's the kind of the epitome of active listening, where you've got somebody that's kind of steering, maybe they're taking notes and they're just looking at their notes and they're not interacting or engaging with you. You kind of feel like, well, I could be talking to a wall here. So
exactly, there was the genuine interest in what I had to say, just kept me engaged with the conversation, and the open-ended questions just had me speaking more throughout the process. So,
and that's the goal. We want people to speak more. Sometimes we want them to speak less, though. Every now and then.
yes, there are people that they can stop talking. This was good.
I've had some pretty wild ones where it's like, whoa, bringing you back to. I did one where the person's transcript was just impossible to follow, and she read it and she said, "This transcript is terrible." And it wasn't the transcript; it was that she had trouble. She would just go off on a tangent and then off another one. She was very nice. It wasn't a lack of credibility, but she had trouble staying focused. Brenda, did Trevor do anything that you had to navigate a little bit? No, you're on mute.
We got a lot going on in this small room. Yeah. So, some emotions come up here, and this is one of those where it's like that 70-30 rule. It's easier, I find, to interview your complainant sometimes than your respondent because it's those open-ended questions that tell, explain, describe, and then they do most of the work. So Trevor did most of the work, and I'm getting the info as he's telling me everything. So he had a little bit more of the weight to carry on that. So it was just sort of getting those emotions out, explaining the process, sort of getting the focus back to what the information we're trying to kind of get from this, and supporting, making him feel supported and comforted, but not in a weird way. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, and our last two, which would be Nicola and Mel.
Yes. So I was Megan, and Mel interviewed me. I felt that she asked appropriate questions, like in terms of not being accusatory in regards to what she was asking. And as a result of that, I felt, a little bit more open in disclosing the information that I wanted to share with her. I felt like she listened, that she believed me, even though I'm not 100% sure that she believed what I'm saying. But at the same time, I did feel as though whatever I'm saying to her, she was genuinely listening. She was attentive, paying attention to what I was saying, in terms of nodding and pausing. And at the end, which was really, really well done, was I asked her, so what's the process going forward? So, like I come in here and I'm bleeding my heart out to you, but not knowing what happens next. So she was able to explain, the process in terms of what will be the next steps going forward. So that I really appreciated, because I left that interview feeling, okay, I have some hope or something to hold on to. Not that I know what the result is going to be, and she kind of explained that as well, but having some hope in terms of, what is going to happen next, or how long this investigation would last for, that kind of stuff.
So that's very important because it's expectations management, but I don't think you can explain the process too many times, because people may have seen the policy, they may know what it says, but the only way they can process it is sometimes through repetition. And Mel, anything that happened that made it harder for you as the investigator, and how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I was trying to, so she played the role of Megan pretty well, kind of emotional.
She's the actor in the crowd.
She is. Actor Nicola. Very emotional, all over the map, just rhyming off stuff, one after the other. So it was kind of like trying to bring her back to, okay, let's go, piece by piece, and try to gather all the information slowly, and allowed her to, if you need to take a break, take a break, take a breath, you want some water, kind of thing. So yeah, she kind of made it difficult in that sense, which was good, because it showed me, that this is normally what happens. Some people come in and they're flustered and they're frustrated and they don't know, things have been going on for so long that they can't really gather all their thoughts all at once. So, offered her support and wellness and all this stuff, at the end, of course. But yeah, just trying to get her back on track, and eventually she was able to tell me all the story.
Excellent. Well, those sound like they went well. Okay, we're going to take a break. It is 2:36, so we'll come back at 2:50. I'll see you again shortly. So before we flip our role play activity, I want to just have us watch a little bit more of the Megan and Michael video. So I am going to.
Feel that he's treated you differently than others?
Yeah, we were at a staff meeting. Actually, before I get into the staff meeting, there was another thing in the lunchroom.
Okay.
I was in the lunchroom and I was talking about one of the machines, the one where you're doing like that thing.
Right.
And it hurt my shoulder. So I told him my shoulder was sore, and he started giving me a shoulder massage, which was, again, icky. Like, that's just creepy.
When was this? When did this happen approximately? Do you know?
It was, I think, like a week ago.
A week ago? Okay.
Yeah. So it was very recent.
He was in the lunchroom?
Yeah.
Was anybody else around?
I don't, people were in the lunchroom. We weren't alone in there, but I don't know who.
Okay.
Like, I don't know who would have seen it, but I just walked away. Like, I kind of, did that and then I walked away.
So did you tell him to stop giving you a shoulder rub?
No, I just walked away. I just kind of,
You started
that,
walking.
and then I walked away.
Okay. So then after the lunchroom, was there another incident? You were about to bring up something about a staff meeting?
Yeah, right. So I'm at a staff meeting and Hannah's there, the one that comes to the gym. And there was something,
Besides Hannah, I'm assuming.
Yeah, there's a whole team.
All the CSRs?
Yeah.
Okay.
and I wanted her to mention something that she had been working on. So I wrote a little note and I just kind of went like this. I didn't say anything. I just passed her the note. And then Michael just kind of laid into me in front of everybody. He's like sarcastic and he's like, what are we, a bunch of, I don't know, 12-year-olds or high schoolers? I can't remember what he said,
What was
but
his tone like?
like sarcastic.
Okay.
Like, what are we, a bunch of high schoolers here? Stop that. He didn't even ask what it was. It was just intended to help the meeting and it was just embarrassing and
Could he be doing it as a joke? Like he was just trying to be funny?
I don't think it's very funny.
How
I don't know.
how did it make you feel when he did that?
Well, humiliated. Like, how would you feel if somebody is barking at you in front of other people? And it was completely because he's mad at me because I wasn't interested in him.
Does he make these type of comments in other team meetings?
No, I don't know. I think sometimes he can be a jerk, but not like that.
Was the comment directed at you for passing the note, or was
Yes.
it directed at you and the person you were passing the note to? Who was it you were
It was
passing? Hannah.
I don't know if it was to both of us or not. It was sort of like, where are we, a bunch of 12-year-olds?
Okay.
So I guess it was to both of us, but I think if it was a couple of guys in the room passing a note, he wouldn't have made that assumption that it was, I don't know, something silly.
Right.
He
Okay.
certainly treats the guys differently than he treats Hannah and me.
Has there been other individuals besides you that you're aware of that is treated in a similar way?
Hannah told me a story about somebody, but I don't know. I don't know about it.
You don't know anything about it?
No.
But it's from Hannah?
Yeah.
Hannah's the one who told you the story?
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things he does in here is, how did that make you feel? Is that a good question to ask? And at what point in an interview would you ask that question?
I think it's a good question to ask. I think every scenario, I think it's a relevant question. To every situation, they may feel different. The person may feel different for each situation, and they will be able to provide different descriptors on how they felt, right? Because each environment's different, and different things could have been happening at the time. So
I think you have to ensure that you establish, possibly, if there's fear or anything that, we have to consider upon her return to work, or her, to make the environment safer for her too. And if there was a substantiated finding at the end, those are some key elements for the employer to know.
Yes. And was it unwelcome? Which has to probably come from, how did you feel about it? Like, was it okay with you? Because there might be, again, 3 things that happen, and I'm okay with this one. That one didn't bother me. It was these 2 that did. So you kind of have to really filter it so you know which were the things that were actually upsetting to her, because maybe it wasn't all. The other one that I wonder how you would approach is this idea of her saying he wouldn't have done that if it were guys passing a note. So he does say, has it happened to anyone else? But how do you assess that? So that's back to, she's alleging basically that he's engaging in gender bias. How do we test for bias?
it'd be a question for Michael specifically, I think, would be the test on that.
Yeah. So what do you think you would be asking him?
How he usually interacts with different colleagues and so on and so forth.
Okay, that's a good one. What else would you need to do to test that part of her complaint?
Wouldn't it be measured against other witnesses?
Probably. So I think his question about has it happened to other people, she says, no, it hasn't. But I think it also comes from some understanding of gender bias and how it plays out. So making sure that you are well versed in what bias looks like and what stereotypes are. Bias and discrimination are incredibly difficult to prove. They talk about, certainly in terms of racial discrimination, there's a Supreme Court of Canada decision that calls it the subtle scent of racism. And that's the challenge. You're looking for subtleties. But is it more likely true than not that he would have responded in a different way? It would really help if you have some other evidence. There's where your similar fact actually might come in, JP, but any similar scenarios where he's overlooked, maybe not that exact thing, passing notes, but overlooked disruptive behavior in a meeting by people that aren't two women. So I would not just ignore that one and decide it's just contextual. You may need to know, is there a larger issue here where he discriminates against the women that report to him? Is he engaging in broader behavior? That may be one of those scope creep issues, though, where you'd have to decide, is this part of the original complaint, or is that then expanding it too much? Any other observations you would make on that particular segment? What was handled well or maybe less well?
You're a good actor, by the way.
None of it was scripted. We just kind of went off on our own. It was a fun day. Okay, so I will show you the next set of clips, and then there's so there's two more. One, a little bit more of this part of the interview, and then one for Michael. Okay.
I don't want to get other people involved, really. I mean, obviously you got to talk to Hannah, but I just don't want other people involved.
Well, I understand that, but in order for me to properly do this investigation, I will meet with people. I will make them agree to the same confidentiality provisions that you had to agree to.
Like that's going to work.
Well, the fact is, there's repercussions and there's repercussions and consequences for people who breach those rules, but their meeting with me is based on the fact that I have a duty to do this investigation. It's part of the responsibility as an employee to meet with me. I will meet and choose witnesses based on who I think are important, but at the same time, if you feel there's anybody I should meet with besides Hannah, it would be good for you to give me those names.
Okay. All right.
Besides Hannah, anybody that you
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you could maybe talk to Carol Marshall about that stupid thing where she was sitting beside me and figure out. And then Hannah can tell you that the other person, like he apparently did something on an elevator or something. I don't really remember the story. Hannah just told me, but she can tell you that person's name. But I just really have to tell you, I'm really worried about what's going to happen to me here, because nothing good can come of this for me. No matter what, my career's over. My reputation is toast. Like I can't win. I just want it to stop, but I can't win.
Well, as you're aware, the company is during the course of this investigation, we have separated you from Michael.
Right.
Until I make my findings and make my conclusions, you are not going to be reporting to him. So we're at least in that way, there's not going to be any encounters or any issues and this is to protect not only you, but also to protect Michael. I want to make sure both parties are treated the same during the course of this investigation. And once it's over, based on my findings and my recommendations, the company will take this seriously. Otherwise, again, why would they be having me doing this in the first place?
Like, what do you think? You've heard what I've had to say. Do you think, do I have a case?
It's an interesting point. I can tell you that until I complete my investigation, I'm not going to reach any conclusions right now. But during the course of my investigation, I've got your side of the story. I will meet with Michael. I will give him a chance to present his version of the story, and then I will come to a conclusion. But it's very important for me to get your version as best you could give it to me. And it looks like you've given me everything. Is there anything that you feel that you've left out, or is there anything that you feel that you should let me know about that I didn't cover?
Not that I can think of. No, I can't recall anything else.
Well, make me remember, it's not over yet, because the issue is if something comes up during the course of the investigation, I may need to meet with you again. And on top of all that, if new information comes to light based on your allegations, or it's something that you feel is important for me to be aware of, by all means, you can contact me. You have my correspondence, you have my contact number. We can set up a
I've switched to my laptop. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
In here. Okay. So for some reason, my desktop is restarting. All right. Let me just give that a second. I don't know if I have. It may have kicked me out of the Zoom meeting and I'll have to go back in. So here's what I'm going to do. I think my laptop has the ability to set up breakout rooms. Okay, so I'm going to send you back into your breakout rooms to do the opposite side. So to do the, sorry, I'll put the video on here. To do the opposite side. So this time we're going to do the interview of the Michaels. And while you're doing that, I will figure out what's happening with my desktop so that we can watch the remainder of the interviews. So I will open the breakout rooms now, and I think we have it set to 20 minutes. Okay. Here you go. So this is a slightly different interview than with a complainant, as you pointed out when we did the debrief on the other one. With the complainant, it's often just tell me what you want to tell me, and then you're trying to figure it out. But with the respondent, you tend to need a little bit more direct questions. And some of them will say, can I tell my side of the story first, which I will let them do, but you are leading it a little bit more. So let's go to it was Tammy and John, you worked together, right? So how was that interview different than, say, the one with Megan?
The one with Megan was more victim centered or trauma informed, just to make sure they felt comfortable in that setting. Obviously, this interview, you'd have to preface it with, this allegation's been made. One of the things that seemed to be consistent from the video we watched was he kept saying things like, I don't understand why I'm here, or deflecting, saying, oh, you should investigate this. I would make it very clear to him at the beginning of this that the purpose of this interview is to really hear your side of the story. This complaint has been made, but here we are today. And we're trying to get to the root of it. And without your participation in this, you're not going to be able to do yourself any justice because we really need to hear your side of the story. One of the other things that we do is to try to be consistent. I don't know if we brought it up the last with the Megan scenario is I would have a female sergeant or staff sergeant in the interview with me and maybe conduct Megan's interview. But I would also have them present for Michael's interview, just to get two reasons to be consistent, but also to gauge how he is with them as a female.
Mm-hmm. Would that be probative how he is with a female? Do you think that would lend anything to your findings? I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but just if you notice he's being a jerk towards the female investigator, what would you do with that?
I think his behavior and demeanor should be a part of it, even if they're I think that it has value and it might corroborate her idea of the, different treatment. We also said that, and I liked what my partner said, is that he would, when he came down to the assault, like when she slapped him in the face, he would actually, use that trauma way of speaking to him, like, how did that make you feel? Like, that must have been because he'll probably go down a rabbit hole with that and feel like we're on his side with this. And be consistent with the timeline, like get him to create a timeline as well. Were you a sergeant when this happened and when it wasn't happened? And then go through some of the discrepancies in his actual document where he talks about everyone makes sexual jokes like that. And then his next line is, if he heard somebody say, I would like her to ride my horse, he would address that because that's inappropriate.
Mhm.
So like, tell me what's the difference between the two? Like, how would you discern what's appropriate sexual jokes and what's not appropriate sexual jokes? So I think really trying to iron out what his thought process is. I don't think he would be able to stay calm if this is true to form, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
You might see him getting agitated, but I do, and I do really like you looking at what is his definition of inappropriate. It's sort of like, what's your definition of yelling? Because everybody has different ideas of what's appropriate in the workplace. Well, everybody does this, so that must make it appropriate. Well, just because everybody's saying it doesn't mean it doesn't violate a policy. So getting that ascertained would be really helpful. So that's a great point. Okay, Linda and JP, anything that came up for you doing that interview that you thought was different or harder than maybe a complainant interview?
I know this is a bit of an overlap, but you know, of two different types of investigations. I know it's a harassment, but they're also part of a regulated profession.
Mm-hmm.
So in a profession where they gather evidence. So, although, there's difficulty with being dismissive as the person being interviewed has answers. They're vague, but they're, not I guess taking culpability. Once you put everything into consideration into a succinct, let's put this all together. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. Allegedly happened. These are the complaints.
Mm-hmm.
Why would somebody come forward like that and say that? And it progressed and show them the evidence. And that's how, you take your time and think about what just happened and reflect upon that. And Linda said she would give it up after I said that.
He got you, did you? I do often say, how do you explain these allegations? Like, what's your theory for why Megan came forward? That can be very telling, and it also gives them an opportunity to tell you why they think this is a false complaint or why they think there's a problem. And again, you want them to feel heard, but sometimes what they have to say is actually a thread that you need to pull a little bit. But I will often say, you've said it didn't happen or it didn't happen the way I described. So from your perspective, what do you think has caused Megan to bring this complaint forward? You might hear, well, she's just mad because I gave her the bad performance review. You might say she might felt rejected, whatever it is. But I do think it's a decent question to ask, as long as it's framed in a trauma sensitive way, so that it's not accusatory. It's not, well, how do you explain this? But so you've given me your side of things. How do you think, or why do you think this happened? Okay, Ottawa. Let's start with Trevor. I don't know who you were working with. I can't remember. Was it
Working with Brenda again. I was the interviewer and Brenda was Michael.
Okay, Nicola, any thoughts on how that was navigated?
Sorry, I was working with Brenda.
Oh, Brenda, sorry. It's late in the day. Brenda, your feedback. You're on mute. It has to happen about every hour. Somebody has to be on mute.
I have two silence buttons that I'm working with here, and I unsilenced the other one. That's funny. So what happened in this one was he stayed calm, but kind of on point. He didn't let me play my games because I was trying to sort of put to him all the other sort of alternative, like she did just as much as I did, and why is she not being investigated? I want one open up for her. This kind of trying to get him there. And he sort of really navigated that and just stayed calm. He didn't sort of elevate with me. He stayed calm and he worked around those questions and just kept asking, well, tell me more about that. Why do why do you feel that's important for me to know? Or he'd just get me to talk, and he didn't let me sort of get off of that track that I was trying to take him down. Spent a lot of time too at the beginning about just the focus of the evolution of the relationship to really see how that changed. And it was only 10 minutes, but very neutral and just kept me on point to try to get details out of me, wouldn't let me not give him the details.
That's good. Have any of you ever gotten defensive yourself because the person you're interviewing or their advisor, whether it's a union rep or whatever, is being accusatory? Have you ever felt yourself getting your back up and feeling defensive? Yeah, I've had not very many, but there was one not too long ago, and it was a lawyer, and it was just like attack after attack after attack after the process. And I finally just took a break and said, I just need to go grab some water. I didn't say, because you're ticking me off and I'm really struggling here. But I think sometimes we have to think about our own reaction. Like, am I getting elevated? Am I starting to react to this? Because maybe that's what they're wanting me to do. I just need a drink of water. Can you just hang on a second? And sometimes just that drink of water is the thing so I can reset. So pay attention to your own responses. If you're starting to get into an argument with the person, that's a good indication that maybe they're pushing some buttons and it's time to step away, even just momentarily. I have had to end interviews where I've had obstructionist counsel, but that's a different thing. It's more when they're starting to say stuff and it's a personal attack and it's starting to land, then I know I need to take a break. Okay, so our last grouping then, that was Nicola and Mel.
So I was interviewing Mel, which she's Michael. So during the interview, I found that, again, that deflection, going around the bush in terms of not providing a direct answer to the question that I was asking. But one of the things I really had to not necessarily harp on, but just to remind him that, listen, I'm here as this neutral party to listen to your side of this, these allegations, and as well at the end of this investigation, I will need to write a report, and so to better reflect, in terms of what he has to say, which will be written in the report, it's a good idea to try and participate as best as he could, right? I'm not here to make any judgments, right? But I'm here to listen, and no doubt I have an investigation to do at the end, but I want to hear. So it's kind of, harping on that piece just to have him understand that I need to hear his response based on the allegations that are being brought forth before him today.
Excellent. And Mel, any thoughts from your perspective on how that went? Brenda's trying to figure out how to unsilence herself.
It's on Brenda for sure, that one. No, it went well. Like, I was trying to be, as evasive and difficult, as possible to, but as calmly as Nicola has been speaking this entire course is exactly what she is like all the time. And she truly is great at interviewing. So she kept coming back to the actual case at hand and the information. And every time I'd say something like, well, she flirts me all the time, she'd ask me, well, explain that to me. Like, what's flirting mean to you, kind of thing. So allowing, her to get answers out of me, and it made, me sort of go, okay, now I have to answer this kind of thing. So it was good. She did a great job.
Do you find it hard to switch from the traditional policing type investigation interviews that you have done into these trauma-informed harassment investigations, trying to get people to open up? Has that been a challenging transition for you?
Mel? Is that for Mel?
For anybody. Because it's a different kind of investigation. It's a different kind of interview. Have you found
I
that?
would say it's hard to, yes, I'd say you're just so instinctual from doing it for so long But there are some common ground themes of the open-ended questions, you know, and going back to something they said and bringing it back in. Well, you said this, tell me more about that. Like, so there's certain techniques that really work for both, but yeah, it's getting that open mind that, yeah.
I would add too, it's a little bit different in a sense too, where, you know, okay, so if you have an accused in the criminal world and you charge that person and it's like, okay, see you tomorrow, buddy, right? There's no emotional connection to a certain degree. But then here we are doing investigations on our own, you know, people in terms of this is someone I could actually go back and work with tomorrow, right? I
Yes.
could be on the person's platoon, or I could, you know, that person might have to back me up on a call. So not that you'll do anything majorly different in terms of, you know, you have an investigation to do and you know you have to do it to the best of your ability and you know you have to do it to the point where if you get challenged on it, you better have the information you need to back what you're saying. But the flip side to that is, yeah, you know, you've charged this person, but definitely tomorrow you could be working with the same person that you've laid the charges on in the first place.
Yeah, it does make it tricky. And that's why sometimes it's hard to do things internally because you may know people, you may know their background. In smaller communities, you're going to run into them at the grocery store or at a hockey game. And so it does change it. And I think for me, the biggest advice I would have is just be aware of that it is different. And so that making sure it doesn't creep into biasing how you approach it or modifying things because you want to be gentle on that person because you know them, but just trying to maintain that awareness of how you are interacting.
I think the biggest thing is we have to learn how to slow it down.
Oh, okay.
We're like for us too when we interview in the policing world, it's quite quick, right? Sometimes, and you know we're going after the grounds that we think we require for a successful prosecution. I know that's how I feel, you know, and gathering that information. And here we when we have the people that are a little bit evasive, you know, we kind of have to put on the kid gloves a little bit, be a little bit nicer to and sweeter to get the information and trick them a bit, get them talking, right? So
I like
that's
it when
what I
people
find
think I'm
different.
stupid. Like if they think they have to explain something to me, and I occasionally will get the really arrogant person, and it's like, you know, they think I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, because I want them to keep talking. Talk to me like I don't know what I'm doing because I do tend to get more information when they think I'm stupid, or
Keep talking.
maybe I am just stupid sometimes, and I'm telling myself I'm not. But it does help sometimes just to let them think that they have to explain things to you.
The
Okay.
Columbo effect is real.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
The Columbo effect is real.
Oh, yes, yes, exactly. And we're in a crowd that knows what that means. Okay, there is another piece to the interview with Megan, so I want to show you that one. This is where we got hung up last time.
So Megan, before I print your statement, I do have a couple of questions for you just to wrap this interview up. One, you indicated that you've been suffering some ill health based on these allegations. Can you explain to me how you've been feeling and what's going on?
Yeah,
Take your time. I understand this is difficult.
it's just really hard, you know, I don't want to come to work. I don't want to see him. I get a bad performance review. I figure I'm going to lose my job. And for what, I don't know. Anyway, I've been seeing a doctor. Sorry. Thanks. So I've been seeing a doctor and I'm on antidepressants, and you know, I'm a strong person and I've had stuff happen in my life and nothing's ever made me feel the way he makes me feel. And I'm scared.
Are you on, so you indicated you're on some sort of medication now?
Yeah, I'm on Zoloft.
And is
And
this?
then I take Ativan sometimes when, like if I'm going into a meeting and I think I'm gonna have to see him, I have to take an Ativan just to cope.
And this has been recent that you've been on this medications?
The last few months, yeah, probably 3 months.
Megan, what would you like to see happen here? What
I
would,
don't know. I just, all I want is for it to stop. That's all I ever wanted was for him to just stop acting like that. And if he'd stopped, then I think we could have continued working together. But the more I like, the worse I feel, and the more people are talking about it at work, and everybody's talking about it. Everybody knows I filed this complaint. Just people don't know what confidentiality means. Anyway, the more that stuff happens, the more I think I can never work with him again. How can I ever go back to reporting to him? I'm always going to be afraid of what happens. So, I mean, you guys obviously have to do what you have to do, but I don't see how I can ever go back to what it was.
you do not feel comfortable ever reporting back to him?
No.
Okay.
Okay, so a couple of things on that one. How do you think he handled the part about her mental health? Would you ask the questions he was asking? Maybe not in the same way. Do you explore that? What did you think?
I'm not a fan of how in depth he went with it, talking about the types of medication and stuff like that. It's okay to ask. I think, how has this affected you? And if whatever she says is, I have trouble sleeping, I've had to get, a doctor. Maybe that's good to know for the. I don't know. Do we pass it on to the employer after we do that? Yeah, so that they know the severity of what she's going through for a better either reintegration to work process. I don't know. I think that's probably something I wouldn't put in all that detail into the report.
Mm-hmm. And are you violating something by asking those questions?
That's human rights, right? That's protected grounds, right? So I would, maybe ask it in a different way. Maybe ask it in a different way. What could have something, how would you feel safer at the workplace or something like, I don't know.
And people might volunteer it. So it's not to say you got to say, no, 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 don't talk, but I would just move on. I wouldn't spend a lot of time exploring that, or, what's that look like? Can you send me a doctor's note? We don't need any of that. We need to know their personal experience of what happened, but we don't need a medical evaluation on that, at least not at that stage.
Everything like that, right? So that can be done with the HR level or whatever, whoever they're dealing with for their benefits.
There's also the question that he asks at the end, which is one that we often ask, or used to. I don't ask it anymore, but what do you want to see as a result of this? What do you want to have happen? Do you think that's a helpful question, or do you use it, not use it?
It could
Personally,
be helpful.
I don't know if I like it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Linda. Thank you, Jason.
I was just gonna say it's sort of a double-edged sword, because it could be helpful, because if he just said I just want him to stop, or if he apologizes and I'm fine. However, if she says I want him fired and I want X, Y, and Z, and we can't provide that, then it's not helpful at all.
Right. And it's like it can put people in a difficult spot. Well, I don't know, like that's not my responsibility. Your responsibility is to decide what to do about it. We don't ask people who are robbed, like, what do you want to see happen as a result of this? I'd like my money back. But I think it puts the person in an unfair position. What am I supposed to say? Actually, I'd really like him to be fired. I never want to see that man again. But if I say that to you, you're going to think I'm angry and I'm retaliatory, and you're not going to find me credible. So I can't tell you what I'm really thinking. So I just got to say, I just want it to stop. So I think it's a question that doesn't actually get us anything that will help us in making our decisions. Ultimately, it's the service's decision about what needs to happen next. So you're welcome to watch that full video. You can see the different approaches and things that maybe you find helpful, and things that are examples of, well, I would never do that. They are hard to do. And sometimes you're tired, and sometimes you just want it to end. Sometimes it's boring, because they're talking about things that are just like, come on, why can't people just get along? And so I think being conscious all the time of what's happening in the background for you. Do you need a break? Are you getting defensive? Are you just plain tired? Because it's hard on you too. Just as it's hard on the parties and you need to make things psychologically safe for them, you also need to take care of yourself because these are hard things to do. So going for a walk, taking breaks, those sorts of things can be helpful. So that wraps up our session today that was primarily focused on an overarching trauma-informed approach and how we navigate interviews. Tomorrow, Suhaib will be joining you. He'll talk a little bit more about trauma, how to assess credibility and when, and how to make findings in terms of findings of fact and findings about whether or not something constituted harassment. If there are any other questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes. Give you a little gift of time here. We'll finish a couple of minutes early, but thank you for your contributions today. Role play can be a bit annoying, so thank you for taking it seriously and actually putting some effort into it. I do appreciate that, and I wish you a wonderful evening, and take care.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.